Again, just our request is please, during the time where we have speakers, please desist from eating and drinking. You can do so during the breaks. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this very special Yom Iyun, Leila Nishmas Rav Yehuda Copperman, Zichron Livracha. When I think of Rav Copperman, many memories come to mind. Firstly, about 20 years ago, when I was a student at REITs, I remember meeting Rav Copperman for the first time. He gave a shiur in the main base medrash. I still remember the topic. He discussed why is it that even though we have a concept of ein gozrin gzeira l'gzeira, meaning we do not make a rabbinic decree to protect another rabbinic decree, only a biblical Torah decree, why is it that in cases of basar v'chalav, we in fact find often Chazal seemingly making a gzeira l'gzeira? This question was already raised by the Rishonim, and by the Gemara itself sometimes. Nevertheless, he gave an incredible shiur, and through Pshuta Shel Mikra, in his own unique way, he connected the concept of Basar B'chalav to Avodah Zarah, and through that he answered the central question. Remember, the shiur was fascinating, in a certain way inspiring, and then, with a twinkle in his eye, he pointed out that he does not, nor did he ever keep Chalav Yisrael. Never. And he stated so strongly. We weren't sure exactly what the point was. Maybe there's some kind of defense of Rav Moshe's heter. We weren't sure. And he said, never have I kept Chalav Yisrael. I've only kept Chalev Yisrael. And anyone who knows Rav Copperman appreciates that twinkle, that humor, is something that added so much to his Torah and made it so sweet and so beautiful. Every single time I encounter the word Chalev, just came up in a Mishnah I was learning, I always smile and think of him. My second memory is Rav Copperman, meeting him, being introduced by my very new wife. So he came and introduced me to Rav Pollack, as a matter of course. And then meeting Rav Copperman, I felt I was meeting my wife's grandfather. The warmth, the care. And then the next memories are formed when I joined the faculty, especially the administration, and having weekly, sometimes bi-weekly lunches with Rav Copperman in the Chadar Ochel. Even though at that point he was in the dusk of his life, but the amount of Torah, Eitzah, Hadracha, historical points that he was able to squeeze into a 20-minute conversation was incredible. I told my wife that I'm thinking of writing a book, Tuesdays with Rav Copperman. I don't know if it'll be quite a bestseller, but maybe we'll try. When Rav Copperman passed away, and I heard all the hespedim, all the talks, I remember feeling incredibly uncomfortable. And it wasn't just because I lost someone who I looked up to, who I saw as a mentor, towards whom I had great respect. It was also something else. It was almost an existential angst of sorts. Not only did Rav Copperman build the Michlalah, and what I mean by that, not just as educational institution, with all of its various different aspects, but in terms of just the physical building and the land and all the gashmius of Michlalah, he built himself, with his wife, of course. Besides that, his scholarship, the articles, the books. Besides that, the chesed, the tzedakah, the gimachs. So these are things I knew before. But as I heard more and more from people who came to the Shiva house and other places, this is an individual whose life was full. But he had time on a Friday to call an almana who had lost her husband to see how she was doing. and then another almana, and to write letters with students. And when he found out that one of the Israeli students here needed money for a medical reason, made sure that she got money. So I felt to myself almost that I felt dwarfed. I felt that here is this individual who had accomplished so much, and I had accomplished so little. And I felt incredibly bothered by that point. But at some point, I realized that maybe through his death, Rav Copperman taught me one last lesson, which I'd like to share with you for just a couple of minutes that I have. The Gemara Maseches Yuma tells us that Hillel mechayev ha'aniyim, Rabbi Elazar mechayev ha'ashirim, v'Yosef mechayev ha'rishayim. The Gemara there explains that Hillel was extremely poor, and he had all the excuses in the world not to learn Torah. And Elazar ben Charsum, he was fantastically wealthy. He too had many excuses, quite different excuses, of course, not to learn Torah. And Yosef HaTzadik also had struggles. Nevertheless, he too was able to become a great individual. There are many, many questions that are asked on this line of the Gemara. Hillel Mechayev, Rabbi Elazar ben Charsum Mechayev es Hashirim, but Yosef Mechayev as a Rishonim. Question number one, which is asked by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, what is this chiyuv over here that we're talking about? This chiyuv to learn Torah. If it's some kind of a chiyuv, why do I need anyone to be mechayev me? Why am I mechayev to wear tefillin? Because the Torah says so. I don't need any person to be mechayev me in that. Why do I wear tzitzis? Why do I keep Shabbos? And there are some very difficult mitzvahs. We don't find that there's some individual that's mechayev us. That's question number one. Question number two, it's very strange. Yosef HaTzadik, he is the pinnacle of tzidkus. He's mechayev as a Rishoyim? Why? So Lubavitcher Rebbe answers his question by saying that the chiyuv of Talmud Torah here is not some objective chiyuv that a person may have. Rather, it is something beyond. The Mesilas Yesharim asks or points out that the most important thing to know is ma chavaso be'olamo. That means that all of us, besides some objective obligation that we have, each individual has our own set of obligations. That's unique to us. That's unique to our own kochos. The Gemara points out that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu judges us, there's an omek hadin. There's a depth to the judgment. And if he's just judging us with some kind of a checklist, what's the omek hadin? The omek hadin is, did we live up to our own unique set of potential? What about Yosef being mechayev as a Rishoyim? Yosef struggles too. Yosef had a choice what he wanted to be. This is particularly highlighted in the famous Gemara. At the moment of the Nisayon, he sees the vision of his father, and the father says to him, you have a choice what your name would like to be. You could be Yosef Roes Azonos, or you could be Yosef HaTzadik. You choose. What do you want to be? Determine your own destiny. Determine your own name. And Yosef made that decision. He said, regardless of how hard it is, I'm going to move myself up. And it seems impossible. Everything was against him. But he saw, with this very profound vision, that he was able to become something much greater than maybe at first was obvious. Rav Copperman used to say, the reason why I was able to write the Meshech Chochmah is because I wanted. It was not obvious at all that an orphan, and given his situation, which was very difficult, could accomplish what he accomplished. But he said, I wanted. It was not obvious at all. The basic trajectory should have been much, much lower. He was very fond of quoting Rav Dessler and Michtav Eliyahu in the first Chelek, that when Klal Yisrael needs, a person decides to step up, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him siyata d'shmaya beyond it. He believed that, to the very fabric of his being. And that's how he lived. You know, we have ambivalence when we hear about Gedolim, read Gedolim books. Some of us get inspired by what they do with us. These are people that are beyond us. Some people get depressed because I can never reach that. And I think both of these approaches are incorrect. I think the lesson is that Gedolei Yisrael pushed themselves beyond their comfort zone. Saw possibilities for themselves that maybe were not obvious at all. And I think that's a lesson that Rav Copperman taught me. My Rebbe, Rav Kan Shlita, likes to point out, Shma b'ni musar avicha v'al simecha. Shma means, listen, I'm about to teach you something. The lesson is about to begin. The bell rings, the class starts, the teaching begins. Al titosh mitor semecha means don't leave, means the lesson happened. When did it happen? It happened without you realizing it. This is a lesson that Rav Copperman taught me without me realizing that he was teaching me a lesson. When I sat with him on Tuesdays, I knew the lesson was taking place. I was making mental notes. But here, maybe the most important lesson of all happened Behesach Hadas. And I think that this may be one of the most important aspects of Rav Copperman's legacy. Strive beyond. See abilities that others do not see. Believe in yourself. You can accomplish incredible things. And I believe that this legacy permeates this institution. And we hope that all of you will learn this lesson, absorb it, and perpetuate it in Rav Copperman's name. Thank you very much.
מבקשים מרב מרדכי לגשת, הוא יגיד איתנו שני פרקי תהילים, ואחר כך כמל רחמים. נקום לומר תהילים, פסוק בפסוק עם הרב, יגיד פסוק, ואחר כך אנחנו נגיד את הפסוקים. Somebody would turn off the light or two, so maybe you can see. It's on the screen is what's on the paper. Make it a little so I can see it at least too a little bit. The light's in my eyes. Boker Tov. Rav Zabarsky told us so eloquently that the day is an important day. Significant day because when we're someplace, we don't just happen to be here. When we're someplace in the world, it's because there is a reason for it. There's an ultimate reason, that's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But past that ultimate reason, there's all sorts of shluchim that exist that allow us to be in certain situations, l'tov u'lemutav. And now that you're in the halfway mark of your Michlalah, so this Yom Biyun, which coincides with the time of Rav Copperman Zal's Yarzheit, was last week, was Kav Gimel Shvat, Kav Gimel Teves, which coincides with it. So it's worthwhile to have this moment, both to have an appreciation of the person, what individuals have learned from him, as Rav Zabarsky told you. After I'm done, Dr. Debbie Lipschitz, who's one of the veteran Talmidot of Michlalah, were you on Machal? Was it called Machal then? When the first Machal, the second Machal, okay, more than 2 years ago. And Mrs. Ginsburg's here, my first Machal too, so we'll point that out too. And then you'll hear from Rav Bernstein, who, besides all sorts of other familial connections that he has, Rav Bernstein has been working for the last number of months and will continue working for the next number of months because I had a chance to see the raw material and past raw material, an extraordinary translation of one of Rav Copperman's Svarim on Pshuto Shemikra, how it goes through each parsha and various subjects of Pshuto Shemikra that makes itself known through parshas of the Torah, and Rav Bernstein's unique ability to take what Rav Copperman's written and to use the word translate doesn't do Rav Bernstein justice, but to present it in a way that's faithful to the original and faithful to the language it's being translated into. And he'll share some of that with you as well. And of course, at the very end, we'll hear things from Tehila Greenblatt, the things that she has to say uniquely about her grandfather. It's clear in these week's parshos and in this week's Parsha of Yetzias Mitzrayim, that Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't just looking for the freedom to go from Mitzrayim. It wasn't just Sur Mirah, to escape the evil and to escape the affliction of Egypt, but there was a goal. There was also an Asay Tov. Tavdun et Hashem, to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And of course, that type of Tavdun et Hashem, to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, reaches its fruition at Matan Torah, the greatest moment that was ever in history, the greatest moment that will ever be in history, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Vayered Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did that which is for us to imagine. He had the infinite come and be part of the finite, and gave us the Torah. So Tavdun et Hashem becomes the goal of the Yetzias Mitzrayim. And all the parshas that we're reading in Shemos are leading up to Matan Torah, which we'll have in a couple of weeks. And when we come to discuss Matan Torah, something that we've all learned maybe from 3rd grade or 4th grade was the wonderful words that Am Yisrael said at Matan Torah. Naseh v'nishma. And all of us know, because we were all taught, that Naseh v'nishma meant type of loyalty and fealty, that no matter what we're going to be told, because we'll only hear it afterwards, we'll only hear it subsequently, we commit ourselves to doing it no matter what. We don't have to first understand. We first have our commitment to do it because it's the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But what escapes some of our learning quite often is that Naseh v'nishma isn't the only statement that Am Yisrael time of Matan Torah. And in fact, that there are 3 statements that were said, and we're going to examine what they are. The first statement, which is emphasized here, is they just said Naseh. At the time of Bnei Yisrael coming to Har Sinai, they know they're about to receive the Torah. Vayanu, kol ha'am yachdav, vayomru, kol asher dibir Hashem naseh. We're willing to do what God tells us. The word nishma is very evidently absent here, especially because when we hear the words naseh, we almost think automatically the word nishma is supposed to follow. But there was no nishma that was said here, only naseh. Vayoshav Moshe is divrei ha'am el Hashem. So as Moshe, as a shliach of both HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael, he did his shlichus. Obviously HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew what they said, but there was a certain point that Moshe should be the shliach conveying the idea. Naseh, God will give us a Torah, we're going to do it, but the magic words of Naseh v'nishma aren't there. And then there's another pasuk in Parshas Mishpatim, a little bit confusing to us more than once and more than twice, is the fact that even though the Iker of Matan Torah is given in Parshas Yisro, as we all know, there's bits and pieces of Matan Torah that are expressed in other places, notably at the end of Parshas Mishpatim, and also in the Sefer Devarim as well. And there too, at the end of Parshas Mishpatim, we have another installment, a small installment of Matan Torah. And again, we have the word Naseh without the word Nishma. Vayavo Moshe vayisaper laham es kol divrei Hashem. There's kol hamishpatim. Vayan kol ha'am kol echad vayomru kol hadrim asher diber Hashem Naseh. Kol hadrim asher diber Hashem Naseh. That which God has spoken, we are going to do. We heard what He said. We're makabel what He said. We accept HaKadosh Baruch Hu's adnus upon us. We accept HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mastery upon us, and we're going to do it. But there's no nishma here. What God said, we're going to do, because we heard what He said, and therefore willing to do it. Let's go back to the previous pasuk once more. Quite different than Naseh v'nishma. We heard whatever message was passed on at that particular shlichus of Moshe Rabbeinu, and that which was passed on at the second time in Parshas Mishpatim, we heard and we're willing to do it. We listened we nod our head, we acquiesce, we're willing to do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says. Extraordinary statement of loyalty. There's no statements that say we have to think about it, we're going to review it, we'll consider it, we'll come back in 3 days and give you an answer. Am Yisrael hears the words of God and they immediately understand, na'aseh, we're willing to do it. But again, the magic word of nishma that follows na'aseh isn't found at this point whatsoever. Finally, we come, also in Parshas Mishpatim, just a few psukim afterwards, then we have Vayikach. The vav is missing here. I see. There's a vav that's supposed to be here. So when you cut and paste, you have to make sure you do it accurately. I guess I didn't do it accurately. Vayikach Sefer Habris. Vayikro B'oznei Ha'am. Vayomru Kol Asher Diber Hashem Na'aseh V'nishma. Here, of course, we have the words that we've been searching for already in these psukim that we've had a chance to see before. And we want to understand what happens here. What happens here after the two statements of loyalty, of willingness to follow what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says? What happens here that becomes Na'aseh V'nishma? But let's look at the psukim once more. We'll see them as we go on. Vayanu Cholom Yachdo Vayimru Kol Asher Diber Hashem Na'aseh. And let's look at the second pasuk. Vayavo Moshe Vayisaper Lo Es Kol Divrei Hashem Ve'es Kol HaMishpatim. A new word. God's giving mitzvahs already. A new term is being introduced here. The term Mishpatim. Now, in the context that we see all the time when we learn Torah, we see Chukim and Mishpatim and Eidot. We see all sorts of mitzvahs that have their own definitions. And when they're used in specific contexts, those definitions are meaningful. Eidot are testimonies. I remember things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for me. I eat matzah on Pesach to remember that the lechem oni. I eat maror to remember Vaymaru es chayehem. I do all sorts of things. I sit in a sukkah, that B'kiva sukkos, so Shavti is b'nei Yisrael. There's all sorts of things that are testimonies that I'm giving witness to the fact that I still appreciate all the goodness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for me. And Mishpatim is usually used in the context of what we call civil law. Ben Adam L'Chaveiro. That which a lot of Parshas Mishpatim itself begins with. If I do damages to somebody, what is my obligation? If I harm somebody, what's my obligation? If I'm supposed to take care of something for you and I don't do it well, what's my obligation? All those things are parts and parcel of Mishpatim that exist. Is that what this Mishpatim is referring to in our pasuk? I don't know. But again, here, whatever it was, the people said Na'aseh. And it's worthwhile to point out, if they said Na'aseh from the very beginning, if they said Na'aseh already a day before, 2 days before, exactly what the chronology here is sometimes difficult to understand, but that's not our subject today. If they had already said Na'aseh, the Torah is not going to write they said Na'aseh a second time just because it's worthwhile to remember that they're loyal people, that they're nice people. The Torah is not writing it a second time just to say, remember they said Na'aseh, they said it again. Everything in the Torah is a chidush. Everything that's written in the Torah I need to know. And when the Torah writes something in a repetitive fashion, we know that the statement that it was repetitive fashion is incorrect. So there's something there. So the Na'aseh that I read a second time has a different type of strength, a different balance, has a different type of impact than the first Na'aseh. What's that? I don't know, but I certainly have seen the difference between the first pasuk that doesn't mention Mishpatim and the second pasuk that does mention Mishpatim. And now when I come to the third pasuk that mentions Mishpatim, because in Parshas Mishpatim, and I'm already paying attention to the fact that any added statement in the pasuk, like a new response from Bnei Yisrael, because what they responded to up until now on what was said doesn't necessarily hold for what will be said in the future. So if they said Na'aseh the first time and then these Mishpatim are given, then they're required to say another Na'aseh because there's a new aspect of the relationship of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded. That there's this thing called a Sefer Habris. What does Rashi say Sefer Habris is? Remember what Rashi says? Rashi in Chumash, Parshas Mishpatim. Anybody remember what Rashi says? Sefer HaBris is all the Torah that was written up until that time. Bereshis in the beginning of Shmos, because the rest of the Torah wasn't given yet, and it's called Sefer HaBris. That's what Rashi says. Vayikach Sefer HaBris, Vayikra B'oznei Ha'am. Up until now, what did Moshe Rabbeinu do? He brought God's word to the people. At this point, there's a Sefer, whatever it is. I mentioned what Rashi says. We'll see other ways to look at it in a moment. Whatever this Sefer is, he reads it to the people. It's a different type of a statement. Vayomaru, what happened? What's the transition that takes place that brings us a Nase and brings us another Nase and then takes us to a Nase and a Nishma? So let's see what we're able to understand. So we had the first pasuk. And then we have Rashi's statement on the second pasuk. The second pasuk said Mishpatim, and Rashi tells us what are the Mishpatim? Not Sefer HaBris. What are the Mishpatim? Sheva mitzvot shenitztavu b'nei Noach. Sheva mitzvot shenitztavu b'nei Noach. You should ask. The mitzvahs that were given to b'nei Noach happened how many years before? How many years before? If some say they were given to Noach, some say that most of them, 6 were given to Adam Arishon, but the 7th was given to Noach. So they happened maybe from the beginning of creation, close to 2,500 years earlier. Or they happened 1,500 years ago, prior to Matan Torah. What is it that it says, the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach? So the Rambam teaches us, we'll see a little bit of the Rambam, not that doesn't directly say this, but we'll see another Rambam in a moment. The Rambam teaches us that Sheva Mitzvos B'nei Noach was the Torah for B'nei Noach until the Torah was given. Just like there was a mitzvah of Pruvu, there's a mitzvah of Bris Milah. What else was there in Sefer Bereshis? Gid HaNosheh. So there are mitzvahs there. They were given as individual mitzvahs to all of humanity, especially if they were given to Adam Arishon, according to one opinion, or to Noach, to Avram Avinu and his descendants, to Yaakov Avinu and his descendants. All of those the Rambam teaches us in Hilchos Malachim, they were all erased. Those mitzvos were temporary mitzvos. They might have lasted for millennia, but they were temporary mitzvos that were in abeyance, that were waiting for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give the totality of mitzvos on Har Sinai. So therefore, when the HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Torah, that which we read in Sefer Bereshis as a mitzvah of Purvu, of Bris Milah, of Gid HaNosheh, those mitzvahs were erased. They no longer exist, not even in cyberspace. They were given anew, freshly, at Matan Torah. And just like we say, Mechadish b'chtuvo b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh Bereshis, so not b'chtuvo b'chol yom, but b'tuvo b'Matan Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Mechadish, all the mitzvahs that were there, and we'll see in a moment what the implication is. So Sheva mitzvahs were given. And not only that, there were also other mitzvahs that were given to Bnei Yisrael, not just to individuals, but to Bnei Yisrael before Matan Torah. What were they? Rashi says, Shabbos, Kippur of the Aim, Pora Aduma, V'dinim. That's what we call Mishpatim. Shenitnuhem b'Morah. Why did that which, when is Morah, by the way? Morah occurred when? Morah occurred when? After Kriyas Shamsuf, yes? Morah occurred after Kriyas Shamsuf. They were given, Rashi says some, there's different opinions what they were given. It's very interesting to know why they were given those mitzvahs, but that's not our business today. They were given mitzvahs in Morah. But those mitzvahs also did not have the impact of Matan Torah. They were individual mitzvahs that were given, but that wasn't Matan Torah. So they too, even though they had to be given in Morah for whatever reasons that they had to be given, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't wait for those mitzvahs for Matan Torah, they were only given temporarily, and they were erased So therefore, there's lots of implications. I don't do Parah Aduma because it was given in Mara. I do Parah Aduma because HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded it. I don't do Shabbos because it was given in Mara. And I don't even do Shabbos because the Pasuk says in Bereshis, Vayivorech and Vayikadesh, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made Shabbos. That's up in heaven, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made Shabbos. My obligation to fulfill Shabbos all stems from Har Sinai. But not just our obligation as Am Yisrael, who have Taryag mitzvos, but it extends beyond that as well. And thus, we can go to the next slide, I hope. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Melachim. Hilchos Melachim of the Rambam is the very last sefer in Mishnah Torah. And the full name of it is really, if you look in some editions, Hilchos Melachim Umilchamosehem, the laws of kings, the laws of the wars that they're allowed to do, and then it also deals with, at the end, the nature of mitzvos and the nature of goyim and their obligations. And Sheva Mitzvos B'nei Noach, by definition, that's where it's found. That's where it plays a prominent part. It says the Rambam in Hilchos Melachim Perek Ches, referring to non-Jews. Kol ha-mekabel Sheva Mitzvos, a non-Jew, who says he'll observe the Sheva Mitzvos. V'nizar la'asosam, and he observes them scrupulously. The Torah says not to. The Torah says have dinim, to do justly in your communities, civil law. He does it. He's concerned about it. Harezo mechasidei umos olam v'yesh lo chelek olam haba. Olam haba is not limited to us. Olam haba can belong to all of humanity. And just like Olam haba comes to us, Be'ezrat Hashem, with our observance of mitzvos, so Olam the Goyim, with their observance of the mitzvos that were given to them. That's what the Rambam writes. That's the reward. It's not the same thing. Observance of the Sheva mitzvos isn't exactly equivalent at all to the Targum mitzvos. For those who remember, Lefichach hir bohem Torah mitzvos, that applies to us. So it's not the same thing. Olam haba is not an exclusively Jewish province. It's a place that others can be as well for fulfilling God's will. The who is always a limitation. When do I say a non-Jew who observes Sheva Mitzvos B'nei Noach has a place in Olam Haba? She kabel oson v'yas oson b'pnei shetziva b'hem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's the next word? B'Torah. Ni shetziva b'hem HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Torah. Let's continue reading. We'll explain what he means. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu let us know through Moshe Rabbeinu, through Matan Torah, that the Sheva Mitzvos B'nei Noach is something which is incumbent upon them to fulfill. Sheb'nei Noach mikodim nitztavu b'hem. Those are the same mitzvos, but they are renewed. Aval im asam b'nei hechrei hadas. But you have a very intelligent, moral person, non-Jew, who has decided that it's appropriate that you shouldn't steal, that you shouldn't tear limbs off of animals and be over Eber Min Achai, that idolatry just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Ein ze ger toshav. Echreadas means he decided on his own. Ein ze ger toshav. He's not considered a ger toshav, a non-Jew who lives in Eretz Yisrael, who has special rights because of his observance of Sheva Mitzvos B'nei Noach. This person doesn't have those special rights. Ve'eno mechasidei umos olam, v'lo mechach mehem. Who do we call chach mehem? Somebody who's able to understand that what's right and wrong in the world. Someone who's able to understand what the ethical values are in the world. Someone who's able to understand what the moral values are in the world. That's the person we call a chacham. Says the Rambam, one of the people who was chacham mikol adam, one of the people who certainly deserve such a title, that's not chachma. Chachma is to understand that there's more to a person than that which a person is able to deliver from his own side, from his own being. There's more to a person than that which a person is able to understand. There's something beyond a person. Because if you think about it, if a person decides this is right and this is wrong because this is my decision, this is what I have decided, then the person doesn't think there's any person above him whatsoever, because he's fully competent to make those decisions on his own. The negative midah that is decried so much, called gaiva, is a person who's not a chacham. A Baal Gaiva can't be a chacham. A Baal Gaiva is somebody who thinks that they know it all, that they're self-contained, that they're a completely self-contained unit. They don't need to hear from anybody else. They're able to derive from their own wisdom and their own thought. That's right and wrong. And sometimes they do the right thing. Doesn't mean that they're wrong all the time. There can be people, says the Rambam, who come up with all the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach on their own. They derive it from their own idea. But that's not a chacham. Who else do we know derived things from his own thinking? Who do we know derived things from his own thinking, who we admire very much? Avram Avinu. But even though Avram Avinu was able to derive much from his own thinking, what did he spend the formative years of his life doing? Looking for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He understood the limitations of what one is able to do. He understood the limitations of a person who thinks that they are able to supply the answers on their own, solely on their own, and they don't need anything else because there's nothing higher from them. So therefore, says the Rambam, it's not just the observance of the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach that makes a person one of the Chasidei Umos HaOlam. It's not someone that just makes him a Chacham. It's something that takes away and is detractful for all his brilliance and all his intelligence and all that he's able to share with us. And we might be spellbound by hearing this great philosopher coming up with these ideas that are in consonance with our views. And we'll say what a moral and ethical person that individual is. Says the Rambam, X, you're making a mistake. If a person thinks that they contain everything inside, then they don't contain everything inside, because there's always more than a person has. We'll note here that the Meforshim point out, or they discuss, whether this means that they don't have a place in Olam Haba whatsoever. The Rambam doesn't say that. So that's an interesting question for the side, which would be interesting to know and explore at other times. So therefore, at the second occasion when HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when Bnei Yisrael responded Naaseh, so they heard these mitzvos, including Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, was given to them. Because Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach is no less a part of the Torah than Shabbos and Kashrus and Bein Adam L'Chaveiro. The inspiration of what we're going to learn today and continue to learn today comes from Harav Copperman Zatzal, who has introduced us to he made that as an open book. I remember to this day, I didn't know who the Meshech Chochmah was, but I can look back, I would admit, when the first time this set came out, so it must have been about 50 years ago, or it was a little bit more than 50 years ago, I was in Skokie Yeshiva in the bookstore, and one of the Rosh Yeshiva, he was just nifter now, Rav Yitzchak Sender Zatzal, was just nifter now. He says, do you know the Sefer? Rav Sender and Harav Copperman were together in Chicago for a certain period of time. He says, do you know the Sefer? Didn't know the Sefer. And he says, take a look. And he opened it up to a certain passage, in Michlalah, Michlalah, very basic essay of the Meshech Chochmah. And that with so many other things that we've been zocher to see over the years, that we'd have been able to learn them at the best on a shallow level. Meshech Chochmah with extraordinarily a great deal with the Sforno as well as developing this sheet of the Sforno. So in that zechus we have the ability to open these Sforim and to learn to see what they say. Says the Sforno on the pasuk that we were learning, Vayavo Moshe vaysaper la'am es kol divrei Hashem mitchilas kos omar ad ve'ela mishpatim. Kol Divrei Hashem are the mitzvahs that they're going to get. Even though they did not yet hear HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving them the mitzvahs on Sinai, they did not hear the words, Tochi Hashem Elokecha. Nonetheless, they were told what they're going to see. What does that mean? Okay? They had the basic mitzvos of the Torah. They were told the Aseret HaDibros. Rashi brings in Chub. Yagon told us, called them the Azharot, that one can take the Aseret HaDibrot and take all the Taryag mitzvos and put them each one belonging into one group that belongs to one of the Aseret HaDibrot. Some are easier to understand where they fit in, some are more difficult to understand where they fit in. But the Aseret HaDibrot encompasses all the Taryag mitzvos. So therefore, in a nutshell, according to this Sforno, I'm used to all the Taryag mitzvos, even though they weren't given with their specifications. And it wasn't just that which was given in Morah. It wasn't just the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. And it wasn't just Shabbos and Porah Aduma and Dinim and other things that were said. They had an overview of all that was said. And then came the specifics. Ves kol ha-mishpatim. Mitchila ve'ela mishpatim ad le'ol Moshe, all of Parshas Mishpatim. At that moment, prior to Matan Torah, Am Yisrael had an exposure that was greater than we're used to thinking about, says the Sforno. It was an exposure that was encompassing. On one hand, all-encompassing in a shorthand manner, and some very specifics. B'nai Yisrael then were exposed to the specifics of halachos. All of us understand, and hopefully for many of us, that this year of our learning has made things more understandable. That's one thing to say to keep Shabbos and to nod our heads because we're Shabbos observers. It's another thing to know the pratim of Hilchos Bishul and Hilchos Borer. That's what it means to keep Shabbos. Parshas Mishpatim did that. Parshas Mishpatim didn't just say you have to be nice to other people and you have to care about other people's property. You have to deal with them nicely. Parshas Mishpatim takes us down to the details. Because the halacha is the details. Because the halacha is Kadosh Baruch Hu. And so at that point, B'nai Yisrael now were exposed to more. Not just to know that Matan Torah was coming, as was in the first pasuk in which they said Naaseh. Now they had an overview of all Taryag mitzvos, and a sense of what the detailed specification of mitzvos are. And in Parshas Mishpatim, there's things beyond Dinei Mamonos, monetary matters and civil laws. There's mentions of Shabbos and Yontif and Shemitah and Ribis, all sorts of other halachos are mentioned there as well. Torah is not just a generalization of things that are nice to do. Torah is a specification that an act that a person does has to be in accordance with Ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not just one's attitude, not just one's sense of feeling, but every action has to be in that accord. One of the Achronim say that on Shabbos, a person should never move their hand without first thinking if what they're going to do is correct, because Shabbos has so many halachos. So now we have another view of what is being given at this time, what B'nai Yisrael sees at this time. Let's get now to the pasuk of Naaseh v'Nishma and see what happened differently. And we'll have a few pasukim before that. We're at Har Sinai. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving the Torah. Exactly as I said before, the chronology is something to be studied. Exactly what point in Matan Torah is being discussed here. Vayishlach es na'arei b'nei Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu sent the youth of Bnei Yisrael. Vayalu olos vayizbechu zvachim shlamim l'Hashem parim. They brought korbanos. Vayikach Moshe chatzi hadam. So there was blood from the korbanos, as you know, when the korban is shechted, the blood is collected, and in general, what is done with the blood in general? It's put on the mizbeach. At a certain point, whether it's an ola or a chatos or an animal or a bird, it's put on the mizbeach. That's where the blood is done in different ways. Vayikach Moshe chatzi adam vayosem bo aganot. He put them in pans. Vaychatzi adam zorak al mizbeach. Half of the blood he threw on the mizbeach. What happens with the other half of the blood? Vayikach sefer habris vayikra b'oznei am vayomru kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh v'nishma. Vayikach Moshe es Adam, the one that was in the pans. Vayizrok al ha'am, he sprinkled it. Vayomer hinei dam habris asher karas Hashem imachem al kol hadvarim ha'eleh. Something new is happening here. What word appears twice here? What word appears twice that wasn't said before? The word bris. Sefer habris, dam habris. Bris is an agreement. How does that agreement work? They already said they're accepting the Torah. So l'chor, there's no more to that agreement. God says, I'll give you the Torah. Ani Hashem Elokeichem. Tem tiyuli la'am. You'll be my people. I'll be your God. They accepted it already. What's being added in this particular point, where this Sefer Habris is being read, where this blood is being thrown upon them? And some of us might say, it doesn't sound good to have blood thrown upon you. Dam bris. What occurred at this moment? Let's see what the message is. Yeah, two things. That's the previous pasuk, yes? Mishpatim, not bris. Says the Meshech Chochmah, Da de b'nei Noach husaru al dinim. B'nei Noach has an obligation to observe dinim. And because it says mishpatim, so we go back to the original meaning, understanding of mishpatim, as we use dinim. And Chazal tell us, he continues, that that's a mitzvah. And what does dinim apply to them? Does that mean, for example, the halacha of arba shomrim, that you have a shomer chinam and a shomer sachar and a socher and a shoel? I agree to take care of your property in various types of ways, and I have different types of obligations depending exactly what I agreed upon and what the rules of our agreement is. Does that mean that applies to non-Jews as well? They have halachos that we know? Not so. Shitat rishonim dehuni musim. Appropriate behavior. Shedasu adam nosein lahem, that people think is appropriate. People get together, they have an honest legislature, they have accepted law, common law, civil law, legislated law that they do to be fair, to have honest application of law to all the people, and not allow people to be victimized by people who take things from them. So when a non-Jewish country has that, or a non-Jewish society has that, a city, a country, so they're fulfilling that mitzvah of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach of dinim. Aval, says the Meshech Chochmah, lachuf, to force it upon them. V'lirdot, to force it upon them, al chukei Torah undareha, hurak mitzad shekol Yisrael arevim zeh b'zeh. There's an individual responsibility, and there's a communal responsibility. God speaks to everyone. God gave the mitzvahs to us. Atah uvincha vitecha. Once you become bar mitzvah, bar mitzvah, you're the atah in that pasuk. HaKadosh Baruch Hu addresses you, and He gave it to non-Jews as well, even not such a personal manner. But everyone has an obligation. Everyone has a responsibility to themselves. God told us to do something. I stand before Him, and I have to do what God instructs me to do. But for me to force somebody else to do something, for me to say, why aren't you doing so, or even as a Beis Din, not just an individual Beis Din, but Beis Din representing the governance of Am Yisrael, for the Beis Din to come into my private life and tell me what to do, God, who are they to tell me what to do? Says the Meshech Chochmah, Hurak mitzad shekol Yisrael arevim zeh b'zeh. It's because there's a mutual responsibility. Where did that mutual responsibility come from? We'll see in a moment. The imi avor echad, once there's mutual responsibility, once somebody does a sin, even though it is a victimless crime, it doesn't seem that anybody's suffering from it. Hu mazik l'chavero v'klal kula. Until the concept of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh, I exist as an individual. I live my own life. You live my own life. Your own life. As long as I stay within my Dalet Amos, I do what I want. I make the choice. That's my Bechira Chofshis. God doesn't like it, then God will do to what He should do. I do what's right, and God will reward me the way that He decides to reward me. But you don't look into my house. Don't say, how come you act like this? How come you don't act like that? You have no right to do that, not only as individuals, but as a community. There's no Beis Din that gives you those rights. If there's no idea of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh, but once you have the idea of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh, Yesh leBeis Din lachuf lishpot ha'overos mitzvos Hashem Yisborach. The community, okay? The community, that's what Beis Din is here. The official body of the community that oversees things are to be done. When we were Zocha, and when we will be Zocha to have a Melech, then there'll be two bodies that have that responsibility. There'll be the Melech, and there'll be the Beis Din. The Ran, one of his drashos, Yud Aleph, talks about when there's no longer a Malchus, that Beis Din, as we'll see in a moment, takes over those responsibilities because the Melech has a role to fulfill. If he's not there, somebody has to do so. It just doesn't go by the side. Somebody has to take responsibility. But the community, the authority of the king, the authority of the Beis Din, the Sanhedrin, has that obligation. Lishpot ha'over mitzvos Hashem Yisborach, debelow zein zeh mirayroy she'isar v'echad b'mesh yesh l'adam min kono. If it wouldn't be for that, ein zeh min haroi, it's not appropriate. What's it my business with your relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? If you harm me directly, you hit me, you take my property, then I have a right to be interested in myself. That's not a Arevim Zeh B'Zeh. You've victimized me. You've harmed me. But whether you daven or you don't daven, whether you keep Shabbos or you don't keep Shabbos, that's between you and the Ribono Shlom. What gives us a right to interfere? He didn't yet tell us where we have that right. Let's continue and see where that right comes from and see the unique difference that exists with us. Lachein, says the Meshech Chochmah, Mikodam Amro, the pasuk said earlier, Kol Rim Asher Diber Hashem Naaseh V'lo Kiblu Adayin HaMishpatim. The word Mishpatim wasn't mentioned. It wasn't yet incumbent upon it. Aval Kizarak Hadam Al Ha'am Lachnisam Bivris Kmodat Amar B'Mechilta Yisro. It says, Amar Lem Atem Kshurim Anuvim Utfusim. The breast said to Tam Yisrael, as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, you're tied to me. You're wrapped up with me. I'm grabbing you. We're all one part. Zeh Sefer Habris Shekorsu Kol Yisrael Yachad. So there is a progression in our psukim. Progression of a willingness to say, we will do it as individuals, and the more we learn as we get to Mishpatim, we will do them as individuals. But the purpose of the bris at Matan Torah that the Torah tells us about in Parshas Mishpatim is to take us to a new place. What's that new place? Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh. And why does that place exist? Because when someone does a mitzvah, we're all beneficiaries. And when the opposite occurs, we're all victims. And therefore, what word expresses this idea? What word expresses this idea? The word of Nishma. Let's think for a moment why the word Nishma expresses this other idea. Let's go down to a few more places, and we will see. There's other things that you can learn on your own in terms of what brisim are and what they're not. But let's go to the last part of the paper that you have in front of you. The Rambam has Hilchos Mamrim. See that? It's on the second page, on the second part. Hilchos Mamrim, or you can look on the screen. Anybody have ever heard of Hilchos Mamrim? When you hear the word Hilchos Malachim, we all know what it means. If we don't know the specifics, in Hilchos Shabbos we know what it means. In Hilchos Mechira we know what it means. In Hilchos Avil we know what it means. What are Mamrim? Anybody know? Anybody know what a Zakin Mamre is? What's a Zakin Mamre? Parsha Shoftim. All right, so we have new things to add to the curriculum, right? Zakin Mamre is a member of Beis Din, a member of the Sanhedrin. After the Sanhedrin has made a decision and paskened, that he instructs people to do things against the decision of the Sanhedrin. The Torah empowers the Sanhedrin to make halacha. Haaretz nasan livnei adam. Lo sasur meyasher yagid lecha yamin v'shmol. The Torah empowers the Sanhedrin to make the decision. They don't do it on their own. And the Zakin Mamre, who b'mezid, as the pasuk says, ignores the fact that this is God's will that the Sanhedrin will vote, and they voted 36 to 35 that this, because it's 71 members, that such and such is a halacha. He wants to ignore because he thinks they made an error. He's called a Zakin Mamre. Mamre is another word for rebellious. Hilchos Mamrim means the laws of rebelliousness. And what's included in Hilchos Mamrim? Hilchos Mamrim is the source of the halacha of authority that exists in the Torah. So not only does the laws or the responsibility of the Sanhedrin, not how Sanhedrin acts, not what they do, not their procedures, but the very role that the Sanhedrin has, and then followed by Hilchos Malachim, which follows it, the role the king has. What is authority in halacha? Who gives somebody the right to tell you something else? And therefore, within Hilchos Mamrim, if you're looking for Hilchos Kibud Aveim, you find it there as well. Because the Torah gives parents authority as well to tell us things. And in Hilchos Mamrim, the Rambam expands upon the idea of Beis Din's rights. And the Rambam brings us Gemaras, and he codifies them for us that we're able to follow. And there's something called in halacha, a term that you've heard of, I hope, Horat Shah. You probably heard of the idea of Horat Shah by Eliyahu on Har Carmel, when he brought korbanos, shchutei chutz. It's also to bring korbanos outside of the Beis HaMikdash once there was a Beis HaMikdash. It's also to bring it. One can't have a private bama, a private altar. It's also to do it. And yet he did. There's something called Horat Shah that we learned that there's rights for people to do a hora'ah, a psak, sha'ah, temporarily. Temporarily could be a long time, could be a one-time instance. It's temporary. What are some of the laws of Horat Shah that apply to the Sanhedrin the way that we live our lives? Says the Rambam in Hilchos Mamrim, V'chein imra'u lefi sha'ah. If Beis Din sees, based on specific circumstances, Horat Sha'ah, levatel mitzvah taseh u'lavor mitzvah saseh, to tell us not to do a certain mitzvah or to violate a mitzvah. What happens when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos? What don't we do? What don't we do when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos? We don't blow the shofar. And when Sukkot falls on Shabbos, what don't we do? We don't take lulav and esrog. Mitzvah d'oraisa to take lulav and esrog on Sukkot, whatever day of the week it is. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa to take the shofar, to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. What's Chazal made a takana? Still the fisha. Not forever, not in all circumstances. But they have the right to do so. Why would they do so? Kidei lachzir rabim l'dat. In order to make sure that people observe Torah correctly. Olatzil rabim Yisrael milat dvarim acherim. To make sure that people don't err, don't stumble, because that's the gezeros that exist. Keep a gezerah, I say siyag Torah. Don't get too close to the Yisr, you might stumble. So keep away from the Yisr. They decide based on the circumstances of that particular moment. We'd be zocheh to have a Sanhedrin today, and hopefully all of us talked about it this morning. What did you talk about this morning? We'd be zocheh to have a Sanhedrin today? Or Rishona. They would see the circumstances, how we live, and they would give us specific instructions to deal with the circumstances circumstances in which we live today. But we're Yisomim. We don't have a Sanhedrin. Listen to the next words of the Rambam. Shem shaharofei chosech yado or raglo shozeh kedei sheyichyeh kulo. Someone's ill, and their life is endangered, and they're going to be saved by amputating one of their limbs. So you do it. Kach based in morim bizman ben hazmanim. So based in the Sanhedrin has to give instructions at various times. Lavos mitzos lefi sha'ah. K'dei shikaimu kulam k'derech shamru chachamim harishonim chalel alav shabbat achad k'dei shishmor shabbatot harbei. What does the Rambam do? He sees Am Yisrael as a whole unit. He sees Am Yisrael as an entire body. And thus the Radbaz says in the Perush there, Ein hamashal zeh tzodek ela im kein anroim et kol Yisrael ki'ilu heim guf echad. All of Israel is one group, is one body. Otherwise, why would the mashal make sense that I do this and I do that to save this one and to save that one? Why does it fit together? Because all of Israel is one body. When did we come one body? When did we come one body? What did the Meshech Chochmah just teach us? Came one body at the time of the bris. When I do not look at my own welfare as well, and to think that I exist as an island by myself, but when I see myself involved with the totality of Am Yisrael, when I see Am Yisrael as being Guf Echad, not just some figment of imagination, not just some sweet thing to say, but the Rambam in Hilchos Mamrim, the Rambam Halacha, teaches us that idea. Am Yisrael is one Guf Echad. And when do we come with that Guf Echad? We became because at Matan Torah we didn't only have mitzvos from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu made a covenant. But the covenant wasn't just with us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The bris was with us and among ourselves. We made it with each other. Half of that blood from the korbanos, which was sprinkled upon all of us, and all of us were at Sinai, as Chazal teaches. Those who were there physically and those who weren't there are united by this korban that was bought, the blood that comes together. That puts Am Yisrael together. That doesn't say that I no longer have this naseh, that I have to do things. But nishma means I don't just do it for myself. Nishma means I hear from others as well. Nishma means that I'm able to have things that don't just come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, comes from the Sanhedrin, comes from the halachos. Naseh is this individuality. Nishma is a communality. Naseh is the Adam HaPrati. Nishma is the Klal. That's the progression of when Am Yisrael went out of Mitzrayim. It wasn't just to be individuals who keep HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mitzvahs. It's to understand that we have a mutual obligation and responsibility, one for the other. And if we think about Rav Copperman, who said some of the visitors here, none of you knew, when he began the Michlalah out of that sense of responsibility. As he said himself many times, it was important to say, Ten kavod about. Let the Jewish woman learn Torah at a level of understanding. Let her commitment to mitzvahs grow because of that learning. Let her responsibility for Klal Yisrael grow because of that learning. Rav Copperman Zatzal embodied this sense of responsibility. Exactly what Rav Levarsky said before, where he might have gone in mind, I don't know what Levarsky had in mind. But maybe Dr. Litter, some of those things when she talks with us. But I can tell you as follows. He had lots of opportunities. A very smart person, a very personable person, a very capable person. He could have chosen for himself many things to do. He didn't have to start Michlalah. He could have been a rabbi, he could have been a professor. All sorts of things were there because he was a very uniquely gifted individual. But Rav Copperman taught us in his own life, a person doesn't live for himself only. A person doesn't exist just that he should be successful. A person exists, while he recognizes because of the covenantal relationship that's not just between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's between all of us. For myself, I do for others. When I do for others, I do for myself. There wasn't selfishness there. It was an opportunity for mutual and communal opportunities to grow together. Gadol hama'aseh yozer min ha'oseh. Those who do for others is just greater than those who just do for themselves. Rav Copperman was a ma'aseh, was who did for others, and all of us who are here today, and so many others, whether the people who learned the Meshech Chochman and never met Rav Copperman, or learned the Sforim or read his Sforim, or the thousands of students have come through Michlalah from the very beginning, for the first 35 years, just women, and now all these men who run around the campus on Sundays and Thursdays as well. All of them are beneficiaries of Rav Copperman's vision, that we're not individuals. We have an obligation to the Klal. That's a personal obligation, but it doesn't extend just to us. It goes to others. Na'aseh, there's things that we have to do. Ishma, we hear the others as well. We hear the voices of others have to teach us. And with that, we make our contribution. And with that, we all become students of Rav Yehuda Copperman, Zichrono Livracha. I should turn the lights. All right. Let's see what's here. You have a break of a number of minutes, but not to go around. Okay, 1 second. Let me figure out how to get this out, and then you have your stuff to put into. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, let's see. How do I get this out?
What do you get out?
I want to take out my disc on key and let you put in yours. No, I can pull it out. No, there's a thing you're supposed to. I'm just trying to look for the icon where you're supposed to push it.
Okay, 1 second.
Okay.
Please find your seat so we can continue, please. Please remember during the speakers not to eat or drink. Please do so during the breaks. You know, it's interesting. During this break, I got to meet some of the alumni who predated me a bit, and it's always a fascinating feeling. You feel you know a place, you know what it's supposed to be like. Maybe you've been even around for a couple of years, but you meet individuals who knew the place before you, and they have a very different take than you do, and that's always fascinating and interesting. Our next speaker has been in Michlalah for a couple of years, quite a few years. She's one of the first Talmidot of Rav Copperman. She was the head of the English department here in Michlalah. Please give your attention to Mrs. Lipschitz, please.
Okay, so after that onerous introduction, yes, I was in the second year of Machal. That's way back in 1971. I was 17 and a half. And continued here in Michlalah after that before going on for academic degrees. And then coming back to Michlalah as a teacher. This is my 36th year teaching in Michlalah. And during that time, I remained close to Rav Copperman. On every level, as a Talmidah, I remained a Talmidah. Basically, I stayed in Machal as far as being a Talmidah is concerned. As far as being a teacher in Michlalah, having a family, marrying off children, etc., etc., at every stage of my life, it was basically Rav Copperman, Rav Copperman, Rav Copperman. At the same time, Rav Copperman and I passed a number of different issues in Michlalah and in other things, and so as you'll see, I have gathered quite a bit of information, both directly from Rav Copperman, from other family members of his, and also from other chavrusas that he's had over the years, especially when he was younger, and so hopefully I will be able to give you a little bit of a portrait of Rav Copperman, the person, not just the Talmid Chacham, because that is the aspect that most Michlalah students receive, but he was so much more than that, and he was such an interesting person. I think Rav Povarsky also mentioned that a little bit when he spoke to you a little bit about his Tuesdays with Rav Copperman, which I think is a fabulous idea. Multifaceted and always had something interesting to say, always had something insightful to say, always peppered, of course, with divrei Torah. So what I'm going to try to do is to give you a slight overview of his life and of who he was and why he did things, how he did things, and some of the things that mattered to him and that formed the person that he was. And of course, as both Rav Povarsky and Rav Pollack have both said, people have different kochot nefesh, and they have different kochot, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu adds to that when you take on something that's bigger than yourself. And I hope that will come through as well. It is extremely, extremely difficult sitting down and to say to myself, okay, what can I bring to Machal students who've never seen him, who've never heard him, who have never seen him walk around the campus? What is it that I can say that will in some way revive the dmut of the person, to revive the person that he was. So I hope that I am not doing him a disservice in what I am going to be saying, and I hope that at least you will gain some insights from it. So this is something new that I received recently. Even Professor Rosenwasser and Shifi haven't seen this as yet. This is a birth record from Ireland. As you see, it says here, and this is 1929. And the address is 14 Victoria Street. And it's in June, and the 7th of June, which corresponded that year to Kafchet Iyar. And the name here is Judah. It's the birth record for Rav Copperman. This is his father, Abraham Copperman, and his mother, can't read the first name here, what? Sadie, right, and in English she was Sadie. Sarah Zlata in Hebrew. Copperman. The business that they had was a clothing manufacturing business, and maiden name, which is down here, was Saperstein. So you have quite a bit of information. What? Yes, we know. I don't know if there's any connection between the Sapersteins, but this is, I think, a slightly different family of Saperstein. Okay. So I've also pepper this PowerPoint with some photographs. Some of them, of course, from a period from before I knew Rav Copperman, obviously. I'm not quite that old. And the first thing I'd like to show you is the question of remaining Orthodox in a very Catholic environment, which was Ireland, when Rav Copperman was growing up. During the World War II, of course, people couldn't get to mainland Europe because of the war, because most of Europe was occupied by 1940 already. And so he and his brother and a friend, that's Rav Copperman's brother, who was a year and a half older than him and passed away mamash a few months after Rav Copperman. And this is Rav Copperman here, and this was a friend of theirs. They went on a bicycle tour of Ireland. And they have all sorts of stories, some of them more famous than others, but all sorts of stories in the family about this famous bicycle tour. One of them being that at one point they had climbed a mountain, and a very, very heavy fog descended, and they were stuck on this mountain for 24 hours. They couldn't move to any great extent more than like 1 or 2 meters, that's a few feet, in either direction. And so they stayed there. And part of what they did during that time, because they couldn't really read very much or do very much, and it was just very, very heavy fog, they sat there and they sang opera songs. So, anybody who knows Rav Copperman and singing knows that it's pretty cute. Okay, so they stayed at one point in a youth hostel, and the youth hostel had several laws in those days. One of them being that the young people staying at the youth hostel had to draw water from the well and schlep it up to the main building. There was no running water, and so every day different people had the task of going to the well and bringing up pails of water and these very heavy pails of water. And of course, since they were staying over Shabbat, the question came up as to, okay, what are we going to do about Shabbat? So Rav Copperman said, what we're going to do is going to be very simple. We're going to take over the schlepping of water for Thursday and Friday completely, and then on Shabbat we'll let everybody else schlep the water. And that's what they did. And on Shabbat somebody said to them, like, how come you guys aren't doing it today? And the other guy said, leave them alone. They did it for like 48 hours and didn't bother us. So without creating any kind of big question about being Jewish or about keeping halacha, they found ways of doing it that remained non-confrontational with the other people. The same thing went for lights. There was a lights out policy, and everybody had to turn off the lights in their rooms. And of course on Shabbat they couldn't turn off the lights. So the question arose again, what are we going to do about the lights on Shabbat? And Rav Copperman hit on a plan, and he said, okay, we're going to make a competition. We're going to offer a bar of chocolate, which was very rare in those days. We're talking about the 1940s, when Belgium and France are both, and Switzerland are both off the map as far as Ireland is concerned. So you couldn't get any really, really great chocolate. But they had a bar of chocolate, and they said whoever turns off the most lights in the hostel will get the bar of chocolate. And of course there was a mad rush to close the lights. So again, they found a way of keeping Hilchos Shabbos without having any problems. Another issue was when his brother Meishi had a test in the university on Shabbat, and this test was he was studying engineering, and it was a major test in his field, and it was being given on Shabbat. And he went to the professor and said to him, look, I can't do this test on Shabbat. I am Sabbath observant. And the professor said, I don't care. So if you don't do the test, you're out. And Rav Copperman's brother said to himself, okay, if that's the situation, then I'll have to just accept it for what it is. But there's no way that I'm doing the test. And at the same time, Rav Copperman was in the was at the university, and he had a tutorial with a person who was then dean of the University of Dublin, and in Greek. He was studying Greek, and the professor said to him, "You look a bit downcast today. What's your problem?" And he said to him, "Well, my brother has an issue that he might be thrown out of the university, and he might not be able to continue his studies." And the professor said to him, "Well, why not? What's his problem?" And he said, "Because he's the Sabbath. Because it's a question of religious liberty, and he can't write a test on the Sabbath because we are Sabbath observers." And this dean immediately said, "I will take care of it," because he was Protestant. Now, I don't know how much you guys know about Ireland, but being Protestant in Ireland is being almost as much of a excuse me, as much of a minority as being Jewish. There were always problems with the Protestants being able to have the liberty to practice their religion. And so this dean immediately took care of the problem, and his brother Meishi was able to do his test on a day that was not Shabbat and finish. In this picture you have 4 Copperman brothers. There were actually 5 brothers and a sister. Here you've got 4 of them, excuse me. This is the eldest one, who actually put all of his brothers and sister through school, because Rav Copperman's father passed away when he was 10 and a half years old, and his brother left school at that point. His brother was 14 and started to work in the family business, took over the family business, and he was the one who actually put his other brothers through school, and himself did not finish any kind of academic degrees. As you know, Rav Copperman studied at university. We'll talk about that in a minute. His brother Meishi was an engineer. His brother Yitzhak is a cardiologist, and they all live in Israel. They didn't come on Aliyah at the same time. So Rav Copperman grew up speaking English, Yiddish, and Hebrew. Well, the Hebrew, he didn't grow up speaking Hebrew, but he learned Hebrew as part of the Talmud Torah, which we'll talk about in a minute. And of course, Yiddish was the mama lashon of most of the families in Ireland who had come from Poland and the area in Eastern Europe, and English was the language of the street. Well, if you can call Irish English. They also, in school, they also studied Gaelic, Greek, and Latin. Gaelic because this was Ireland, and Gaelic was considered the language, the traditional language of Ireland. And of course, the irony was that all the Jewish kids were the ones who got the highest grades because they could pronounce the GH, which is pronounced like a ch in Irish, and they got the highest grades for Gaelic. There was a test in Greek that was given in school, and they had this little book of passages that were in Greek that they used to learn to translate. It was what you call a language translation method. And his brother, again, Brother Moshe, because they were partially in the same class in high school, they were in the same class. Rav Copperman skipped a grade. And he said to him, "Well, what chapters should I study?" And he says, "I don't have time to study this whole book by heart." And his brother went through, and Rav Copperman went through the book and said to him, "I would suggest you study chapter 11 and chapter 13 by heart and forget all the rest." And that's what Meishi did. And when they went to the test, Each person was called in for an oral test with the teacher, and one person came out and they asked him, "No, so what chapter did you get?" He said, "Chapter 11." Next person came out, "What chapter did you get?" "Chapter 13." "What chapter did you get?" Another person came out, they said, "Chapter 11." Another person came out, "What chapter did you get?" "Chapter 13." So when Maishi went in and translated perfectly a whole chapter from the book, so the professor was so impressed he wanted him to translate even another passage, and he said, whoa, wait a minute, that wasn't part of the agreement with the other students. In university, Rav Copperman studied two majors. He studied Semitic languages, like Assyrian and Egyptian and all these other things, and he also studied law. So he finished with a summa cum laude degree in both subjects at the end of his studies. And it's just a cute story. Rav Copperman did not speak French. But one evening, I was home and my 4-year-old daughter answered the phone. And all of a sudden I hear, "Ima, chaver shelach b'telefon." "Ima, your friend is on the phone." And for me, most of my friends were from France at that point. And so I went to the phone and I said, "Bonsoir." And on the other side of the phone, Rav Copperman started giggling. He thought it was the funniest thing. But my kids are pretty musical, so by the next time he phoned, she already also knew to say Rav Copperman is on the phone. But that's remained one of our famous stories in the family. Rav Copperman also knew body language. He could stand in front of a class and watch students. He always used to teach. One of the reasons that there's a podium here is because he always taught on a podium, even when we were up still in Bayit Vagan. There was always a raised podium for the teachers, and he would look at the class, and he would be able to see every single person. And by the end of the class, if he had seen somebody who didn't look quite right, he would call them over and discreetly and tell them to come and speak to him. And he would say, like something like, "What's wrong? What's happened? How can I help?" Things like that. His sense of where people were or what they were going through or how they had changed from the day before was absolutely amazing. He read people the same way that other people read books. Okay, so one of the things that Rav Copperman was famous for was his humor. So here are a few of his aphorisms. I didn't bring in a lot, I just brought in a few for you to get a taste. He used to say to students, "Put on your thinking shaitels," when he wanted them to start thinking about something and paying attention. He used to say, "Be true unto your teeth or they will be false unto you." He would say, "Choose company, 3 is Lashon Hara." Don't look at me in that tone of voice. When he was speaking to a student and her facial expression changed, he would say, "Don't look at me in that tone of voice." And concerning things that were not for general consumption, he would say, "Keep that under your shaitel." So those are just a few of the famous sayings that Rav Copperman developed. It was part of his idiom to come up with, even on the spot, with aphorisms. Okay, I'll explain this picture in a minute. So when Rav Copperman was in 5th grade, there was a teacher in one of the lower classes, I don't remember if it's 2nd or 3rd grade, who was homesick, and the principal walked in and asked Judah in 5th grade, this was in the regular school, to please come and teach the class instead of the teacher. So this 5th grader went into the other class and taught the 2nd or 3rd graders, whatever it was. That was the beginning of his teaching career. Rav Copperman was here in Israel before he got married, and he went to Yeshivat Hebron. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And during that time, there were a number of Chutz La'aretz kids who were here in Eretz Yisrael. This was about 1951, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. And during that time, they had a break, like a lunch break, with when they had to also have a rest period. And rest period didn't mean that you could do what you wanted. It meant that you had to be on your bed and resting. So Rav Copperman not one to waste any time, because time is what life is made of, according to another one of Rav Copperman's aphorisms. He gave a shir every day in Chumash Rashi of the Parshat Shavua to the other Chutz La'aretz boys who were in his room. And all laid out on their beds, but they all had their chumashim, and he would give them a shir in Rashi on Parshat Shavua. He also volunteered in Machon Gold, which was a women's program at the time of the Mizrahi, and where he also met his wife Sipora afterwards that year. And he gave a shir to the women who we hear from Chutz La'aretz also on Parshat Shavua. So already at a young age he was giving shirim. After he got engaged, and he and the Rabbanit Sipora went to the States, because they got married in the States where her father was a Rav, and the Coppermans came over from Ireland. But the Rav came over before to Chicago, and he started studying in Chicago. So he and two other friends of his who were chavutzot, they went every day from Sunday to Thursday to teach in an afternoon Talmud Torah for a program for kids who were not in a Jewish school. And this entailed their driving over 40 minutes from one end of Chicago to another end of Chicago in order to do this. And the Rav who ran this program was Rav Schultz, and it was for boys from the age of 8 to the age of 13. So it was a very specific age level. But one of the things that you should be seeing here is that Rav Copperman taught different age levels. He didn't always teach college level students, and he was very involved in education and with different age groups from a young age. While he was in Chicago, he did an MA in education. And then when they came to Eretz Yisrael in 1954, they came in Aliyah. He taught at a school that's in Beit Vagan that's called Kiryat Noam and Merob Tzion, which was basically a professional high school where they learned how to do different professions, for example, printing and carpentry and things like that. But they also opened up what they call in Hebrew an Ioni section. That means a section for kids who weren't learning a profession but were learning academics, straightforward academics. And this picture that you have here is of somebody putting on a mezuzah on the new campus of Kiryat Nor in Beit Vagan. The person who is right here is Rav Copperman. When he was the principal of Kiryat Nor and teaching, he opened up the first mathematics stream in Israel in the Yeshiva Tichonit. He also taught in Samidar HaMizrachi Lemorot, and this was a watershed experience because he found that the courses that were being given and the way and the methodology being used lacked Yirat Shamayim, lacked Emunat Chachamim, and lacked a sense of Torah Mishamayim, and therefore he stopped teaching there after a while because he was in direct conflict with the policy and with the ideology of the seminary. So one of the things that Rav Copperman did not like were courses in pedagogy. And in Michlalah, when I was a student, there was very little pedagogy, and most of our courses were mostly in the academic fields of, I was studying Tanakh and English, Other people were studying math or biology or other chinuch miyuchad, special ed. So most of our courses were not pedagogy-directed courses, but were in the academics. And at some point, Michlalah Chinuch, the Ministry of Education, started threatening Rav Copperman that they would cut budget if he did not add more pedagogy courses, which is why my students have a lot more pedagogy than I had. And he complained to me. He said to me, he says, "Well, why do I have to waste time teaching pedagogy when I could be teaching more courses, content courses, and academic courses?" And we had a discussion about it. And I said to Rav Copperman, about 10% of students, even if you give them 10 courses in pedagogy, they're not going to really be teachers afterwards. 10% of them don't need pedagogy because they're natural teachers like you. And the remaining 80%, it's the pedagogy courses that will provide them and help them become professionals. And he thought about it for a minute or two and looked at me and he said to me, he said, "Okay, he said, then we'll add courses." So we solved the problem with Michlalah Chinuch there and then. Once when we were in class, and this was, as I said, we studied still up in Bayit Fagan, in the buildings up in Bayit Fagan. There were a number of Michlalah buildings dispersed in the newer area of Bayit Fagan at the time. And the door of the classroom that particular day wasn't closing. Sorry, that's not Rosh Chodesh Adar. Rosh Chodesh Adar was a different story. It was a story that the girls were, because it was Rosh Chodesh Adar, they were singing. And Rav Copperman, forever the magical pedagogue, walked into class, and the girls stopped singing because Rav Copperman walked into class. And instead of starting to teach, Rav Copperman led the class in more songs, and then after about 10 minutes, he stopped the singing and started teaching his lesson. But the idea was that, yes, Rosh Chodesh Adar is something that is Mesameach, and it's fine to be Mesameach on Rosh Chodesh Adar, and Rav Copperman had no problem singing with the students. So the other story was that had to do with the door, was that the door wasn't closing, and Rav Copperman, after trying to close the door 3 times and the door kept banging and banging and banging, he finally took out his keys from his pocket, went to the door, locked the door, went back to the podium to start teaching again, and dead silence in the class. Absolute dead silence, which Rav Copperman heard. But he also knew why it was dead silence. And he said to the students, he said, "Is there a halachic problem, or is there not a halachic problem?" And of course, there were students who weren't quite sure whether there was a problem of yichud or not, so he spent a few minutes explaining that point as well. My notebook, all my notebooks from Rav Copperman's courses, use 2 sides of the page facing each other. So one side of the left side of the page, since this was Hebrew, the left side of the page had the course content, the actual shiur. The right side of the page had all of the bibliographic and historical information that he would throw out as side comments during the shiur, and of course all of his jokes. It was never a shiur that didn't have jokes. Organizational skills. From a very early age, Rav Copperman was involved with the Jewish youth movement in Ireland. At the age of 16, he actually took over the entire youth movement and was the director of the youth movement. This youth movement was co-ed because in Ireland there weren't all that many Jewish kids. And this picture gives you one of the moments of a tiyul that the youth movement had. And he used to call this period my delinquent past because of the fact that it was a co-ed organization. He was, as I told you already, he was the principal of the secular studies in Kiryat Nar, and those were all organizational things that he did before starting Michlalah. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about Rav Copperman's Torah studies. This is a slightly more focused part. In Dublin, there was no day school. There was no Jewish day school. I don't know how many of you know, but even in the United States, Jewish day schools only started in the 1930s. And in Europe, there was also no Jewish day schools to speak of, excepting in Germany and Frankfurt before the war. But many of the communities had Talmud Torahs where the kids would learn in the afternoon. The principal of the Talmud Torah in Dublin was Harav Moshe Wilensky, and the Rebbe was Rav Menachem Mendel Lev. And all of the Copperman brothers studied with these two people. But that wasn't enough for Rav Copperman, and he asked his mother to please find him someone who could continue teaching him in addition to what he was learning in the Talmud Torah. And his mother found Rav Theodore Lewis, who had come back from the Mir. This is also during the war, right after the war started, and he became an additional Rebbe to Rav Copperman. While Rav Copperman was at university in Dublin, he made a point of making his schedule as early as possible, and of getting it approved as early as possible, in order to have times during the day, especially in the afternoon, for studying Chavrusa. And his Chavrusa at that time was David Lev. I had hoped that Rav David Lev could come here and be with us today, but it wasn't possible. He lives here in Yerushalayim today, and I spoke with him very recently. From the university, at the end of every year at the university, he would go to Gateshead and spend the summer months in Gateshead. When he came, one of his best friends told me once that when he came to Gateshead, he was always on the same daf that they were. Even those students who had been in Gateshead the entire year and had been studying all day Gemara, he was on the same daf as they were when he came to Gateshead, after studying in university with his heavy schedule and everything else. While he was at Gateshead, this was the first time actually that he was away from home for an extended period, and he used to write letters to his mother. This was, of course, long before cell phones and WhatsApp and all the other media that we have today. And when we were students, he used to tell us that he had written letters to his mother, and that it was incumbent upon us as part of our Kibud Avim to write letters home every week, which of course we did. The letters to his mother became very famous because Rav Copperman's handwriting was absolutely awful. And there were times where she couldn't read his handwriting, and she used to take his letters to the local pharmacist, who was able to decipher doctors' handwritings and was therefore able to read his letters. When they made Aliyah, before he made Aliyah, and before he got engaged, he was in Chavar Yeshiva here in Yerushalayim. And, 1 second. Let me go back for a minute. The picture that you have here is a picture of Purim in Gateshead. And this guy here, who looks like a gypsy holding a violin, is Rav Copperman. As I told you, always one for having a sense of humor. So in Chicago, during the period that Rav Copperman was in Chicago for almost 3 years, almost 4 years actually, he attended a Beit Midrash Torah, and the Ramim were Harav Chaim Kreisworth, who afterwards was the chief rabbi of Holland, and a tremendous Talmud Chacham, and also Harav Chaim David Regensburg, who was the Av Beit Din of Chicago. And this information I got from chavrusas of his who were in Chicago at the time with him. The picture here is a picture of Rav Copperman in Poland on one of the Machal trips to Poland. and this is in Gur, in Gora Calvaria. When we went there, and as you see, this is the kever or the ohel of the Chidushei Harim and of the Sfat Emet. After he got married and came to Eretz Yisrael, he attended Kollel of Yeshivat Mir, and this is a picture of Gateshead around 1949. Okay, so still around the time that Rav Copperman attended Gateshead. The official name of Gateshead was the Yeshivat Beit Yosef, and that had connections to the yeshivas in Europe that had been started by a chain of yeshivas in Europe that had been started by Harav Yosef Yozel Horowitz of Novhardok, and the point of the Novhardok yeshivas was that they used to send out students by twos, couples of students, and these students were given a goal that they had to get to a certain point on the map, and they were not allowed to ask for any help on the way. They left the yeshiva without any money, without any food, and they were given this mission to trust Hashem. It was an exercise in bitachon b'Hashem, and they, if they were offered help, if they were offered a ride, if they were offered food, if they were offered a place to sleep, they could accept it. Otherwise, they did without. This was the yeshiva. This was the, I would say, the part of the Musar movement that looked at shiflut ha'adam. In other words, that man is lowly, and therefore, this was the hashkafa that drove Gateshead at the time. The Rosh Yeshiva in Gateshead was Harav Nachman David Lindinsky, and he was the son of Harav Moshe Lindinsky, who had been the Rosh Yeshiva in Radin. I don't have to remind you that Radin was the yeshiva of the Chafetz Chaim. The Maggid Shir was Harav Eliezer Dessler. I'm sure you've all heard of him from Michtav Me'Eliyahu, whose mother was a granddaughter of Rav Yisrael Salant, who was the founder of the Musar movement. So as you see, Gateshead was very, very much involved with the Musar movement, and with the Hashkafa way of not only learning Gemara, but of learning in the Litvish methodology, but also with the Musar movement. Yeshivat Chevron here in Jerusalem. The official name of Yeshivat Chevron was Yeshivat Knesset Yisrael, and Yeshivat Knesset Yisrael was founded by Harav Nathan Tzvi Finkel, and he was also called the Alter, der Alter von Slobodka, right? In Hebrew we call him Aslaba Mislobodka. This is a picture of Harav Finkel. And Knesset Yisrael was also one of the Musar yeshivas in Eastern Europe, near Kovno, and so this was the same name as the yeshiva in Slobodka. So you see that the yeshivas that were in Eretz Yisrael and in Europe, in Western Europe, took the names of the original yeshivas in Eastern Europe in order to show the connection between the different yeshivas. The two schools of thought within these two kinds of schools of the Musar movement was, as I said before, the Shfilut Ha'adam, and as opposed to Gadlut Ha'adam in the other yeshivas. And Gateshead and Novhardok adhered to the former, and Chevron and Slobodka adhered to the latter. So Musar was very much part of the way part of what formed Rav Copperman. He never taught a class in Musar, but he embodied Musar. He embodied the aspect of Musar in his way of life. So a number of stories. One story involved a student who was one of the most brilliant students Michlalah had, whose name was Chana. And she came back, of course, to teach in Michlalah. At some point, she had been diagnosed with breast cancer and survived that and came back to teach again. She taught, I think, on Mondays, if I'm not mistaken, and we would meet in the teacher's room. And Chana and I would have these long discussions, and she was always very articulate in her ideas. And one day we were discussing the question of Gedel Shel Gedel. Rav Povarsky mentioned that a little bit before. That today, very often, there is a Gedel Shel Gedel Shel Gedel, and that there seems to be no end to the amount of Gedarim that we put to something. And all of a sudden, Chana stopped speaking, and she couldn't find the words to speak. And I sort of like looked at her and repeated more, and that sort of enabled her to continue the conversation. And then I walked with her to our class, and then I ran down to Rav Copperman's office. And I said to him, almost half out of breath, I said to him, Rav Copperman, Chana couldn't find words to say what she wanted to say. And he looked at me and said to me, don't you think you're exaggerating a bit? Don't you think this is a little bit too much? So Chana didn't find words, And I looked at him and he said to me, no, leave it. And he started talking about something else to get my mind off of it. The next morning, he called me in the office and asked me to come to his office. And I came to his office, and he said to me, I have to apologize. I looked at him and said to him, what do you need to apologize for? And he said to me, you were right. Chana last night had a breakdown and was taken to hospital, and the cancer has gotten to her brain. He said you were right to have a sense, have an intuition that something was wrong when she spoke to you yesterday. And he said he could have very easily just given me the news without, as awful as it was, he could have just given me the news without apologizing. But that wasn't Rav Copperman. Rav Copperman, from his point of view, apologized because he had sort of belittled what I had said to him the day before. Another story which I heard from him more than once is a story about Rachel. She was a student who didn't pass the entrance exam, and she received a letter. She lived in the Negev. I don't remember if it was Beersheba or somewhere in that area. And the letter said that she was rejected, that she would not be able to study in Michlalah. And a few days later, Rav Copperman got a phone call from her father. Her father asked Rav Copperman if he could come to Yerushalayim to speak to him. And Rav Copperman said, yes, there's no problem for you to come and talk to me, but you should know that I won't change my mind because your daughter's academic skills are not sufficient for studying in the Michlalah. So they made an appointment for coming to Yerushalayim, and the father came to Yerushalayim. And just as in this picture, it was during the summer, early summer, and Rav Copperman was wearing short sleeves. The gentleman who came was wearing short sleeves, and he walked in and sat down opposite Rav Copperman. And he wanted to start speaking. Rav Copperman held up his hand and said, your daughter is accepted. So the man said to him, I don't understand. And Rav Copperman pointed to the man's number on his arm, on his forearm, and he said to him, that is her entrance to Michlalah. That was Rav Copperman. Yom Yerushalayim in 1972, Tafshin Lamed Bet, we had the library, which was in the basement of the building where we were studying, and Rechava Pisgan, the Beit Pagan, was cleared from the tables, and there were chairs put around, and we came down and we had a lecture by two of the Rabbanim who were teaching us in the Michlalah. One of them was Rav Yehoshua Bachrach, who was a tremendous Talmid Chacham. I believe that he studied in Slobodka before he came to Eretz Yisrael. And the other one was Rav Breuer, a very Yekish kind of Talmid Chacham. Very, very different personalities. To give you just a taste, Rav Bachrach would speak very slowly. Every word he said was weighed before he said it. I just gave you one sentence, but imagine sitting through classes that were 45 minutes. And there are Talmidot here who can vouch for the fact that I am not exaggerating. If he had not been such an incredible Talmid Chacham, I don't know if we would have survived the classes. Rav was absolutely frenetic. He couldn't speak quickly enough to get out all his ideas. To the extent that his kippah was always falling off his head and he had to keep moving it around and getting it back into position on his head. And these were the two Talmidei Chachamim who were giving us lectures on. And Rav Bachrach spoke first, and then Rav Breuer spoke. Rav Breuer started to speak and was speaking, and Rav Yehoshua Bachrach gets up and starts walking towards the door. Breuer stops in the middle of what he's saying. Rav Yehoshua, you're not staying? And Rav Bachrach looks at him, and in the same tone that he taught us in class, he said to him, no, he says, I'm just going over there to that table where there's refreshments and I want to bring you something to drink. So I looked at Rav Copperman, and Rav Copperman smiled to me and nodded his head as if to say, that too is what you should be learning in the Michlalah. In the past number of years, in the last number of years that he was in the Michlalah, he used to come out and stand in the foyer of the main building. He was always surrounded either by teachers or by students in between classes, and the students would come over to say, can the Rav give me a bracha? I just got engaged. Can the Rav give me a bracha? I just had a baby. Can the Rav give me a bracha? I'm getting married next week. And for each girl who came to him and asked for a bracha, he would ask her name. He would ask her who the chatan is. He would ask her what the chatan was doing. He never asked where the chatan was learning. He always asked what the chatan was doing, because he never assumed that everybody in the Michlalah was marrying somebody who was learning. He asked what the baby's name was. Only after asking personal questions and only after understanding who the girl was and where she was from and what she was doing and things like that. Did this go backwards? Did he give her a bracha? And then I would walk out of the door with him, out of the front door, and he would say, see, they're making me into Baba Copperman. So in Ruchnius, Rav Copperman also had his aphorism. Life should not be punctuated with Torah, life should be permeated with Torah. It's not just that you have Shabbat and you have Rosh Hashanah and you have Yom Kippur. It's every day. Okay? Your life should be permeated with Torah, not just punctuated with. And he used to say there's IQ, which is intelligent quotient, and then there's the RQ, which is the Ruchnius quotient. And he said every person has just like every person has an IQ, every person has an RQ. There's no Dr. Rambam or Mr. Maimonides. The same person who wrote the halachas of Yad HaChazakah also wrote the philosophy of Moreh Nevuchim. That's because in the yeshivas, usually students learn, Bachurim learn Yad HaChazakah, and in the universities, people usually learn Moreh Nevuchim. The Ramchal did, שיתברר ויתאמת אצל האדם מה חובתו בעולם. A person does not need to find out what his function is in the world. What he wrote was שיתברר ויתאמת אצל האדם מה חובתו בעולמו. In his specific, I think that either Rav Povarsky or Rav Pollack mentioned this before, that Rav Copperman quoted this Ramchal very often to say that each person has their own shlichut, each person has their own function, each person has their own reason for doing certain things. As you know, Rav Copperman published copiously. He published over 50 articles, published a number of Sfarim. He published the Perush on the Meshech Chochma, the Perush on the Sforno. He published numerous volumes on Pshuto Shel Mikra, which you will hear about soon. And in the first volume of a collection of articles that he had written on Pshuto Shel Mikra, he wrote the following in his introduction. This was back in 1974. My natural place was and remains in the classroom, where I study with my students. I do not publish except to extend and disseminate the same Torah Sheba'al Peh in the classroom to those I do not teach face to face, panim v'panim, and an extension of the classroom to get to a wider audience and to bring the Torah that he was teaching in Michlalah and also from his home where he had study groups, and to bring that to a wider audience whom he did not know. This picture is a picture also from Poland. This is a shiur that Rav Copperman gave in the Yeshiva of Chachmei Lublin in Lublin. And finally, just a few words about girls and women's education. I'd like to mention just that in the post-high school education for young women in World War II, there were not many options that were available. And this was true even when I finished high school, which was more than 25 years after the end of the war. There was a seminary for women in Gateshead, and I can vouch for the fact that the women who came out from Gateshead and who taught in schools in England and in France and in other places knew what they had in their notebooks and knew nothing more. In other words, they had summaries that were dictated to them, and that was what they taught. That was the only thing that they knew. When we asked questions, they were unable to answer or to find answers on their own. There was Stern College in New York, which has evolved because of Michlalah, but at the time, Stern College was a continuation of high school level of learning. So if you remember your courses in high school and you compare them to what you have today in Michlalah, which are on a higher level, at the time, Stern College was just simply a continual, the level was exactly the same. And then there was a seminar, Bet Yaakov, excuse me for the mistake, here in Eretz Yisrael, and the seminar Bet Yaakov was, if possible, even on a lower level than Stern College. And of course the university. The problem in university, of course, was that there was no Yirat Shamayim. Those were the options that were available. Okay. So Rav Copperman created a revolution, and the revolution was Tnu Kvod Lechinuch Habat. Respect the education of women, and he opened the Michlalah with that attitude, and with the attitude that women deserve a higher level of Torah learning, a higher level of academic learning than was then available to women, from women and Orthodox women. This has impacted an enormous change in all of the higher education of women in seminaries, including in Stern College and in Bet Yaakov. All the levels have been raised because of Rav Copperman's revolution. Michlalah was the only teachers' college when it opened that had a 3-year program. All the seminaries in Israel, whether they were Chiloni, whether they were secular or religious, only had 2-year programs. After 2 years, women were sent out to teach. Michlalah was the first academic institution to have 3 years of studies, and to push for a fourth year, which would grant it the Bachelor of Education. And Michlalah was the first institution in Israel to be granted the Bachelor of Education. So that Rav Copperman never stopped initiating, never stopped revolutionizing, never stopped changing what was going on. He kept thinking of new ways to improve, new ways to extend, whether it was on the level of the master's degree, whether it was on the level of a men's program, whether it was on the level of Machal, which was one of the first original ideas that he had, beyond the Israeli program. All of these were things that Rav Copperman dreamt up at night and came into Michlalah in the morning and said, okay, this is what we're doing. This is the new program that we're going to be having. So I hope I've given you a little bit of Rav Copperman, a small taste of Rav Copperman beyond the shiurim that you will be having, a slightly different perspective. And for those of us who grew up with Rav Copperman, his loss is simply incomparable, and Yhi Zichro Baruch. Thank you.
She said she can't imagine what it's like to be in Michlalah and not to have Rav Copperman there, which I think anyone who knew him feels that way. There's nothing you can do about it. I always kind of felt that the Michlalah was like the guf, and Rav Copperman was like the nefesh. He was the ruach hachaya within the Michlalah was like his limbs. And now he's someone that you hear about, I guess from a klisheni. So if you know Hilchos Shabbos, that means that you need to become a Kalei HaBishul in order to get what. But his message is still here. It still reverberates throughout the walls here. Mr. Hashem will do so for many years. So my topic, I could speak about Rav Copperman until Giyazman Kriyashma Shel Shachris. I was very close with him. We're a family. He's my uncle. His mother, my grandmother, were sisters. His mother saved my grandmother from Poland. She schlepped her out of Poland. And I was very close with him. We learned Chabrissa for over 25 years. So I have a lot to say about Rav Copperman, but my job today is, especially if Debbie Lipschitz spoke to you, so I think you know everything you need to know in terms of the basics. And we're here to talk about Pshuto Shamikra, which is a subject that's very close to Rav Copperman's heart. And the truth is, I think that the title of the shir is the meaning of Pshuto Shamikra, which isn't actually what Rav Copperman was coming to talk about. But I have a certain achrayas to the title, and then we'll move away to Rav Copperman. Because before we talk about Rav Copperman's thoughts about Pshuto Shamikra, just to define Pshuto Shamikra itself, it's important. How would you define it? What is it? The pshat. We use the word pshat very loosely. Whenever we want to find out what something means, we say, what's the pshat? Which Rav Copperman was kind of allergic to, because if you're talking about drash, really you should ask, what's the drash? What's the pshat? But that sounds funny, as true things often do. But pshat, of course, what it means is the simple, the direct meaning of the word or the pasuk in terms of language, syntax, grammar, and all the things that people seem not to really know anymore. And you get no additional information. You can't have a Masorah to help you with the pshat. You work from the pasuk out. Some people make the mistake and they say that the pshat is the literal meaning and the drash is the non-literal meaning. That's not true. That's a superficial definition. Pshat is the simple meaning. It's not the literal meaning. Sometimes the literal meaning is not so simple at all. Sometimes the pshat, you need to take it, you back off and take it non-literally. For example, from a couple of weeks ago, when Moshe asks for signs, Bnei Yisrael won't believe me, Ve'en lo ya'aminu li, and Hashem gives him one sign, which is the stick turns into a snake, and then another sign, that his hand becomes Mitzora, Mitzoras Kashelik. And Hashem says, V'hayoim lo yaminu l'kol ha'os harishon. If they don't believe the first one, they'll believe the second one. Now, if all you have is pshat, it's very difficult to understand if they don't believe the first one, why would they believe the second? After all, I think they're both pretty good. Who is it that would look at a stick turning into a snake and say, no, that doesn't do anything for me? And then your hand turns into Tzoras and they say, wow, this must be true. How come the hand got you and not the stick? And al derech hapshat, it's very difficult to know how. What does the second one have over the first? And the truth is, al derech hapshat, when it says they'll believe the second one, it doesn't mean the second and not the first. It means the second one together with the first. One sign, no, two signs, people are listening already. Al pishne edim yakum davar. And therefore the pshat, when it says, this Rabbeinu Avram ben Arambam says, when it says, if they don't believe the first, they'll believe the second, it doesn't mean the second and not the first. The second together with the first. But then if you have the drash takes the pasuk literally. You understand how the pshat is non-literal? The second means the two of them together. The drash can move in where the pshat would fear to go. And the drash is it means the second. Do you know why? Because the second one Moshe says, he'll explain why his hand became Mitzoras. And why did his hand become Mitzoras? Because he spoke Lashon Hara about Bnei Yisrael. That's commentary. That's Perush. That's added information. And why will that convince Bnei Yisrael? Because they'll say, oh, that makes perfect sense. We know that anyone who starts up with Bnei Yisrael will get punished. Happened to Paro. It happened to you. Now we're talking. So the drash can help you understand why it's the second and not the first. By the way, I find that Rashi brings that, by the way. It's quite amazing. Because it sounds like for Bnei Yisrael, if you just tell them that you said something bad about them and you got punished, that makes perfect sense to them. Which is amazing. Because the Mitzrim have been doing bad things to them for like 100 years and nothing's happened. You know what I mean? As if to say, it's amazing to maintain that sense of self-esteem. They've been enslaved, and nothing happens. And apparently you can get away with it. And Moshe says, I spoke a bit of Lashon Hara about you. I got punished straight away. And Bnei Yisrael is saying, that's right, you got punished straight away. You start up with the Jewish people, you know what's going to happen. It's amazing they were able to preserve that in light of what happened in Mitzrayim. But so be it. And what is the Yesod HaYesodos as far as Pshuta Shamikra, Pshat and Drash? And this is where Rav Copperman comes in. And what shouldn't be a chiddush, but is often the case, people forget, and therefore one needs to be mechadish again. Pshat and Drash are not enemies. They're not in competition with each other. They're neighbors. They're friends. They complement each other. If you have one without the other, you're lacking the full picture. So you don't need to cast your ballot as if to say, I'm a pshat person, so if you go drash, you're taking away from my domain, and vice versa. They're not in competition. Together they fill out the picture of what the pasuk is saying, with remez and sod. We're focusing on the two levels of pshat and drash. And of course, it must be so. It must be that the pshat and drash are not competing, because they address different parts of the pasuk. The pshat very often won't give you the whole picture. There's certain aspects of the pasuk that the pshat won't help you with. And that's where the drash comes in. And the two go together. The pshat is your understanding of the pasuk if you're not looking for trouble. The drash is when you go back to the pasuk prepared for trouble. Things that are not fully resolved. And then the drash comes in. And you have the composite picture of pshat and drash. We see this from the very beginning, literally from the beginning of time, from day one. Bereshis bara Elokim. What's the pshat of Bereshis? Not easy. And as you know, Rashi's opening comment, amazingly, on Bereshis is, because Rashi's Perush, Anila Basi Eliyash Pshuta Shamikra. I'm coming for the pshat. Good? Good. Ready? Yes. Shall we begin? Yes. At the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. Bereshis bara Elokim says Rashi, Ein HaMikra Zeh Omela Darsheni. Oh, you have to darshan this pasuk. That's it? That's day one? I thought this was pshat. It is. We'll do pshat tomorrow. And then Rashi gives you the pshat. And the pshat is like 10 times harder than the drash. So if you're just looking for pshat, you have an issue literally from the first word of Torah. Because Bereshis doesn't mean in the beginning, it means in the beginning of. And it doesn't say the beginning of what. And you have a problem. And so it is as pshat and drash work together. And you're meant to take notice of both, because each one has something to say. I think all of this was summed up by a story that Rav Copperman himself once told me. I'm sure he repeated this many times. And that is, he was once giving a shiur here in Michlalah, and he got involved in the drash of the pasuk. And one of the girls came up to him at the end of the class and said the following: Harav, aval ze lo pshat. Well, what do you say to that? Well, if you're Rav Copperman, you know what to say. So Rav Copperman said, I'm translating into English, Rav Copperman said, every single thing that you just said is correct. I agree with everything you just said, except for one thing, the word aval. Because aval means but, and that sounds like we have a problem. But drash is never coming into to compete with pshat, that you need to say, but it's not pshat, it's not meant to be pshat. The goal of drash is not to be pshat, it's to be drash. Which means the two go together. Take out the word aval, and you have a perfect summary of the entire class. Zelo pshat. Exactly. It's drash, and now you have both. And this was really something that Rav Copperman, I would say he was fighting for. From a certain point of view, Rav Copperman was always fighting. He's always fighting the good fight. He was fighting against ignorance. He was fighting against either unwitting contortion or willful distortion of what pshat and drash are meant to be. In his time, before he came on the scene and made his revolution, pshat, the study of pshat and chumash, was confined to universities and was a very secular thing, and there was no room for drash because they were seen as competition. And along came Rav Copperman and said, that's not what pshat is. Pshat is not. Each one has its role. And this brings us to really the central question which formed the basis of his monumental sefer, Pshuto Shel Mikra. Pshuto Shel Mikra is 4 volumes. It is not for the faint of heart. It's tough. And you does not walk 4 amas without a footnote. And in some places, Rabu ha-footnotes ala text. And it's only people that like pain that go through the Pshuto Shel Mikra. Very high fiber learning. That's why Rav Copperman himself, as an act of kindness, that's Torah's chesed, he rewrote it and simplified it on the parshas, just to make it more accessible to people like us. And the central question that got Rav Copperman going on Pshuto Shel Mikra is, what do you do when the halacha, as we know from drash, from medrash halacha, and I'm sure you know, by the way, when we talk about medrash in the halachic sense, it is a science. It's not an art. That's also important. Just like pshat has become misunderstood, so too has drash. When you think of drash or a drasha, you might think of what the rabbi says before Musaf, or what someone says, at a Sheva Bracha, they give a drasha. That's not drash. I don't even know what that is. It's not drash. It's like a bit of Divrei Torah, another bit of Dvarim B'Teilim, and mostly Tzar B'alei Chaim, really. Drash is the science of Medrash Halacha, Midrash HaTorah and Adreshes Bahem, the way the Halacha is derived. And now what do you do? And it happens very often when you have a pasuk, and the pshat of the pasuk is one way, but the Halacha is derived another way. So what do you do with the pshat? That is the question. And really, this takes us to one of the central statements from Chazal themselves about pshat. And that is, if you've heard this before, I'll be very happy, Ein mikra yotze midei pshuto. The pasuk does not depart from its pshat meaning. Ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto. Chazal say that twice. It's a Gemara in Yevamos and the Gemara in Shabbos. The pasuk does not depart, never departs from its pshat meaning. Great. The only question is, what does that mean? The pasuk never departs from its pshat meaning, because sometimes it looks like it does. So what's the Gemara saying? And here we could identify two major approaches to this question. What do we mean when we say Ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto? The pshat, you got the pshat and the drash, and the pshat never leaves. The pasuk never leaves its pshat meaning. There were two approaches, or in Rav Copperman's lexicon, he had his own dictionary, as I'm sure you know. Two batei midrash, two, in English, two beis medrashes. I don't know if there is a word. It is now. The first approach, the first beis medrash, is saying, again, the problem is, the pshat seems one way, the halacha through drash is another. What do? Ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto. The first approach says that ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto means that even though it seems that the halacha as derived from the medrash is a departure from the pshat, if you only look closer at the pshat, if you really squeeze it, you'll see that the medrash can also be seen within the pshat. It never left the pshat. Even the pshat should be able to give you this, or the tools of pshat should be able to give you this halacha that we got from medrash. That's one approach. And just to put names to faces, that's the Malbim, and that's the Ksava Kabbalah, and others. Rav Copperman was very familiar with that approach, because he pretty much knew everything written on the Torah. But that was not the approach that he favored. That was not the approach that he adopted. The approach that he adopted, based on the Vilna Gaon and his beloved Meshech Chochmah, was quite different. Namely, the Pshat says one way, the Drash says another way, and they're not the same. And the goal is not to make one into the other. Ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto means you darshan the halacha, and that's that. But you can also learn something from the pshat, which is not what you darshan from the halacha. The goal is not to fuse them together, but rather to see them side by side. The halacha came out from the medrash, and the pshat is teaching you something else. And it's not going anywhere. And it's got its own message. In Rav Copperman's words, the pshat doesn't teach you halacha. It doesn't always teach you halacha. It always teaches you Torah. And this brings us, to become familiar with the way Rav Copperman would talk about things, to his famous two questions. Shtei she'elot. She'elat ha'ketzad and she'elat ha'madua. The question of how and the question of why. What are these two questions? You see, firstly, whenever we see a pasuk, and the pshat seems one way, but the halacha is different, the first question will be, ketzad. How do you know? How do you know that it's different? Why not take it at face value? Explain why the halacha is different. And that will normally happen through drash. So question number one is she'elat haketzad, the question of how. How do you know? Mimachras haShabbos. When is Shabbos? Within the context of Sfiras HaOmer. When is the Shabbos of Mimachras haShabbos? As we know, it's not Shabbos. It's the first day of Pesach. How do you know? If you look in the Gemara, in Menachos, you'll see it takes a daf and a half to thrash it out. By the time you're finished, we know. But we haven't finished. We're halfway there. The Gemara is finished, but we haven't finished. The Gemara's job is to establish the halacha. But there's a follow-up question. Namely, Madua. Why? Why what? If the halacha isn't as the pshat seems to say, then why is the pshat written that way if that's not the halacha? That's the second question. She'elat hamadua. And I'd like to, and that the answer to the question of She'elat hamadua is, what do you do with the pshat when it doesn't give you the halacha, so why was it written that way? Well, you'll be pleased to hear that as far as Rav Copperman is concerned, there are 11 answers to that question. And the result is 4 volumes of Pshuta Shamikra. We'll leave out a few things in the present discussion, but we'll give a couple of classics. I would say these are things that I don't think Rav Copperman could go 90 minutes without discussing these, any one of the above things. Ayin tachas ayin, an eye for an eye. Now, if you know Hebrew and you know biology, you should be able to translate those words. Ayin tachas ayin, an eye for an eye. And it really sounds like if you knock someone's eye out, your eye gets knocked out. That's the pshat. As we know, it doesn't go that way. Rather, if a person knocks someone else's eye out, you have to pay. You've got to pay the value of an eye. Mammon, kesef. How do we know? Consult your local Gemara Bava Kama and Daf Pei Beis and Pei Gimel, and over the course of, I think, of 2 dafim of Gemara, it gets all worked out. By the time you're finished, the halacha is money. So once again, the pshat of ayin tachas ayin is an eye. The halacha is you've got to pay money. She'elat haketzad. How do you know that it's money? Because it looks like an eye. How do you know that it's money? Look in the Gemara. It gets worked out through drash, through midrash haTorah and dreshas behen. But now comes the follow-up question: Madua? And the way we would ask that question here is: if the halacha really is money, then why did the Torah say an eye? We assume the Torah is capable of writing what the halacha is. The halacha is money, right? Money. Demei ayin, tachas ayin, or whatever would have sounded like. So why does the pasuk say an eye for an eye? And here, the answer, says of Copperman, can be found in the Rambam. And interestingly, it's the Rambam in Mishnah Torah, as you call it, Yad HaChazaka, or as we call it, the Rambam, where he says as follows, loosely. If a person knocks out someone else's eye, the halacha is he needs to pay money. And then Rambam asks, so why did the Torah say ayin tachas ayin? Why did the Torah say an eye? And Rambam answers, to teach you. That's what should happen. That's really what should happen to a person. You knocked out someone's eye, your eye should be knocked out. Now, for various reasons, we know that practically that doesn't happen. But in principle, you should know that's what should happen. And moreover, the money you pay is actually ransoming the value of your eye. You pay the value of his eye. Some say you pay the value of yours. But the point is, that is a monetary translation of this punishment. So it's an amazing situation. The halacha tells us what happens practically, or as they say in modern Hebrew, tachlis. But the pshat also has something to say. The pshat says, don't think, if you've got enough money, you can knock out someone's eye, if you can afford it. Your eye should be knocked out. It makes a difference. But why does it make a difference? Or what's the message here? The message is your fellow's eye is not like his window or like his car. You bump into it, pay for it. It's not property. A person is not a thing. What an amazing message. It doesn't necessarily change the halacha. But you need to hear it from the Torah. We cannot reach a point where we just think, when I go through the expenses of the month, so I've got, arnona, gas, water, Plony's eye, I can afford it. I had a good month. And that's what we learn. It doesn't teach us the halacha. It teaches you Torah. And by the way, if you get the pshat message, hopefully you'll never get to the drash outcome. If you remember that the person next to you is a human being, and they're not just a thing. So you take added care. And hopefully we'll never get to. You could almost say that the hallmark of success of the pshat is that the drash never happens. And this is ayin tachas ayin, classic example of of learning something from the pshat, which is parallel to the halacha learned from the drash. And the two go together. Even the halacha looks different now. It's received. It's got now. It's richer. It's deeper. It's got more color now. Now, sometimes, again, just some examples. Sometimes the pshat and the drash are not the same. The drash teaches you the halacha, and it's different than the pshat. But the pshat still teaches you halacha. Now that sounds like it can't be. I mean, if they're different and it's the drash that teaches you halacha, how can the pshat also teach you halacha? Then aren't they the same? For example, I don't want to go too much into details that more than necessary, and I hope what I'm saying is familiar to you anyway. But you may know that during the course of the avoda of Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol goes to the mikveh a number of times. Does anyone know how many times the Kohen Gadol goes to the mikveh on Yom Kippur? 5 times, exactly. Good? First in gold, between the changes of clothing, right? Of Bigdei Kuna. From gold to white to gold to white to gold, right? For each of those 5, he goes to the mikveh. And what's interesting is, if you look in the section of the Torah that deals with Avodas Yom Kippur, and which parsha is that? Feel free to say Acharemos. Anyone? All right, I'll do it. So in the beginning of Acharemos, that's when you have the Avodah of Yom Kippur. The problem is, if you look at the Psukim, they only describe one change into Bigdei Lavan, into white clothing, without the gold and all of that. Which means that if you tally up all the changes, there's only 3. From gold to white to gold. But we know there's 5. Pshuta Shel Mikra demands that you read the Psukim in order. The halacha, you have to see them as kind of out of order a little bit. That itself is, kind of out of order. So what about the pshat? If you hear the Shiloh. Says the Vilna Gaon, and Acharemos will never be the same again. I hope it used to be the same, because it will never be the same again. Says the Vilna Gaon, the Medrash says, after all, how many times a year does the Kohen Gadol go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim? This is an easy question to reassure you. Bring back peace and harmony. Once, just the once. Then that day is Yom Kippur. That is it. However, says the Medrash, that is true for every Kohen Gadol after Aaron. But in Aaron's time, he was able to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim whenever he wanted, provided that he did the Seder Avoda that is described. What we call Avodas Yom Kippurim, Aaron could do any day in order to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Wow. That means, I just want to restate that and plug it in. That means what we call the Avodah of Yom Kippur actually exists on 2 levels. It is the parsha for the Kohen Gadol every year, from that point onwards. And it's also a parsha for Aaron any day during that time. So it has a dual focus. What you could call L'Sha'ah and L'Doros. L'Sha'ah for a specific time, L'Doros for all future generations. The parsha L'Sha'ah deals with Aaron, personally, the person. He has his own rules, any day. The parsha then L'Doros deals with every subsequent Kohen Gadol, once a year on Yom Kippur. And now the question is, which one does the pshat reflect? Aaron's situation or the Kohen Gadol's future situation? Here's something interesting to note, a pshat issue. Throughout the entire description of Avodas Yom Kippur, the pasuk always refers to Aaron, not to the Kohen Gadol. Interesting. Now you can say he's the Kohen Gadol. He's called by name. It is only at the very end, the final 2 or 3 psukim, which say, and l'doroseichem, the Kohen should do this. We shift from Aaron to the Kohen. Why is he called Aaron in the beginning? Because it's about Aaron. This is true in a special way for Aaron at that time, and that's reflected in Pshuta Shel Mikra. You see, pshat means the pshat. You know what the pshat of Aaron is? Brace yourselves. Aaron, the person, because he had his own special rules. And this will explain other aspects of Pshat issues in that parsha. As you know, there's many Moadim in the Torah. The rule is, when the Torah presents a Moed and Korbanos of a Moed, it always tells you, begins with the date, on the 15th of the first month, on the 10th of the 7th month. It will always start with a date. Makes sense. You've got to know when you're talking about. On the such and such day of such and such a month, bring such and such Korbanos. That is the norm. I would say, pardon the expression, par for the course. Korbanos, never mind. Okay, so there's one exception in Torah. Avodas Yom Kippurim. Parshas Acharemos begins with no time. It is not time-stamped. You should tell Aaron, he should do the following, he should bring the following Korbanos. You know when the date comes in? You know when we finally find out when we're even talking about? The final pasuk of the Perek, which says on the 10th of Tishrei, the Kohen should do the following. Manishtana parsha zeh mikol haparshios. How come, with regards to this Yom Tov, the Torah flipped everything around and only tells me the date at the end and not at the beginning? That's a Pshat question, I think. Yes? Pshat question. You know what the answer is? The Torah doesn't tell you the date at the beginning because lefi pshuto, it isn't tied to that date. It can happen at any time for Aaron himself. Kohen Gadol can only go on Yom Kippur. Aaron can go in any time. As long as the parsha is discussing Aaron, it's not time-stamped. He can go whenever he wants. Just at the end of the parsha, we say what was true for Aaron every day is true for the Kohen Gadol on a specific day, Yom Kippur. Those are Pshat concerns. And the Pshat reflects Aaron, halacha l'sha'ah. Oh, and one more thing. Should we ask, because I know that you wanted to ask, is the avoda of Aaron exactly the same as, any day as the avoda of the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur and the Doros? So it's good that you ask, because the answer is yes in almost every respect. But there's one difference. When he changes into Big Day Lavan, he doesn't need to go through 5 changes. He can do all of the Lavan things at once. The requirement of 5 Tevilos is a halacha that relates to Yom Kippur specifically. And now we understand why the Pasuk ordered the Psukim where there's only one change into white. And our question was, why did you write them not in the halachic order? They are in halachic order. They're in the order for halacha l'shah. That's the order for Aaron. He does gold, then everything white, and then gold. That's halacha, keseder. And we see now that the halacha l'shah for Aaron takes precedence. Because if you want to know the order for Yom Kippur, consult the Masorah. There's a Masorah that you need 5. But you're not going to see it in the Pasuk. Because the Pasuk primarily is devoted to halacha l'shah. And so we see that the Pshat and the Drash are not the same. The Pshat seems to imply how many changes? Pshat? 3. But we know from the Drash that how many changes are there? 5. Now 3 and 5 are not the same, but they're both halacha. 3 is halacha l'shah from the Pshat, 5 is halacha l'doros from Drash, in this case pure Torah Shabbat Peh, Masorah. I'll just conclude the business part of the shir with maybe one final example, even though there's many examples we could really be talking until further notice. But another example where the Pshat and the Drash are different, and they both teach halacha, and they both teach halacha ledoros. Now that sounds even harder if we're okay with the terminology from now. They give different messages. What the Pshat says, the Drash says differently, and they're both true halachically for all time. How does that work? So an example from this week's Parsha, Parshas Bo, and from a certain point of view, all these things really get going in Parshas Bo because that's when the halachas begin, and that's when you have to keep an eye on the Pshat and the Drash. This is not a trick question. How many days on Pesach is there a mitzvah to eat matzah? What do we say? 1. That's a good answer. It happens to be true, which is very helpful for good answers. So I just want to back off a little bit, back up more correctly, and present as follows. The pasuk says, if you read your parsha lately, you'll see that the pasuk says, Shivas yomim matzos tochelu. There's a mitzvah to eat matzah for 7 days. Now, if you know Hebrew, or if you have a Hebrew English dictionary, you will know that the pasuk is telling you there's a mitzvah to eat matzah for 7 days. As we know, at least from a certain point of view, there's only really a mitzvah to eat matzah on one day, and even then not the whole day, one night, namely Seder night. Okay, I don't want to make anyone hungry here, but Seder night. Except, I thought the pasuk said 7 days. So how did 7 become one? One night. It can seem sometimes like it lasts a long time, but it's not 7 days. It's just one night. The answer is Medrash Halacha. It's a little bit involved. If you've never heard this before, all I can say is, I'm sorry, but it's as follows. There is a principle like this. The pasuk says, one pasuk says to eat matzah for 7 days. Another pasuk says to eat matzah for 6 days, which excludes the 7th. Once the 7th is excluded from eating matzah, from the mitzvah, it then sheds its exclusion on all 7 days, which means you're back to 0. If you know your Rabbi Shmuel's 13 things that sometimes people say in Shachris, you know, it's just before Psukei de Zimra. My father used to say that if a person comes late for Psukei de Zimra, very often the first thing that gets sacrificed are the korbanos. So, but they are there, and and one of them is Kol Davar Shaya Bichlal. Something was in a group, the Yatsa Min HaKlal, and then was moved out of the group. Lo lelamed al atzmo Yatsa, not just to teach for itself. El lelamed al HaKlal Kulo Yatsa. It's to teach you about the entire category. The 7th day was part of 7 days, but then it got ejected with a pasuk of 6 days. It's no longer in the mitzvah, and then it tells you that none of the 7 days are in the mitzvah. So it sounds like there's no mitzvah to eat matzah anymore. Please do not, no sudden moves until we're finished. Because the Gemara says, so why is there ever a mitzvah to eat matzah? Because there's another pasuk which says ba'erev tochlu matzahs, which is Seder night. I just want to sum up what we just said. One pasuk says to eat for 7 days. One says to eat for 6 days. One says to eat for one night, and the answer is it's just one night. So there's a lot of psukim here for one night, you know what I mean? And only one of the three actually says one night. The others say, well, other things. So it all sounds like a bit of, you know, a malacha she'eina tzricha legufa. It's back to your Hilchos Shabbos. How did we get here? Or as Rav Copperman put it, the halachic arithmetic here is 7 plus 6 equals 0. Now I know some people think that, but it's not true. So what does it mean? Once again, the Vilna Gaon, and the truth is, it's more Rav Copperman's understanding of the Vilna Gaon, or application of the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon says there's only a mitzvah to eat matzah on one night, and isn't it true, by the way? We only make the matzah. Pardon me. A bit flat that one. We only make the bracha shekadushanim it says of tzivanu al achilas matzah on Seder night. We don't make it the next day or the other 6 days. So we see that the first night is different. Yes, but says the Gaon, on the first night, it's a chova. It is absolutely unavoidable. Meaning a person is not allowed not to eat matzah on the first night. If he does, he's done something wrong. It's called neglecting to do a mitzvah. Beyond that, says the Vilna Gaon, even though the Gemara called eating matzah rishus, you know, from the day and then the other 6 days, it calls it rishus, or 7 days for you, or 6 days, let's say. Even though the Gemara calls it rishus, it means it's not an obligation like the first night, but it's still a mitzvah. If you do it, it's still a mitzvah. It's what we would call, if you've heard the expression, mitzvah kiyumis. There is a concept of mitzvah chiyuvis, a mitzvah that you're chayav to do, and mitzvah kiyumis, where there's no obligation, but if you do it, you fulfill the mitzvah. And now, says Rav Copperman, you understand how the pshat and the drash go together. The pshat says 7 days. Now the halacha is, there's only a mitzvah on the first day. So why do you say 7 days? Because there's only it's on the first day there's a certain type of mitzvah, mitzvah chiyuvis. But a mitzvah on some level, de'oraisa, still exists, mitzvah kiyumis, for all 7 days. And that's what's learned from Pshuto Shel Mikra, which still remains. Ein mikra yotze midei pshuto. Go back to the pasuk, and the pasuk says 7 days. Good. And what's amazing here? The message of the pshat and the message of the drash, again, the message of the pshat, 7 days, and the message of the drash, 1 night, are both halacha, and they're halacha ledoros, the different planes of halacha. And that's how the pshat and drash go together. Now, I'm officially here only to talk to you about Pshuto Mikra, which means for the next few minutes I'm talking to you in my spare time. Because I cannot be here saying things, even though Rav Copperman himself would much prefer that I speak about Pshuto Mikra than speak about him. But it's not. This is not his decision. And and really, I'm sure you've heard and you will hear a lot about Rav Copperman, and everything you hear is only a fraction. However much you hear, it will only be a part of it. And I could tell you many things about Rav Copperman, but I really want to focus on 2 things that I think that we could learn from him. You see, there's many things I think you can't learn from Rav Copperman. As if to say, what should I do with my life? So if the answer is, I don't know, write a commentary on the Sforno Meshachachma, 4 volumes of Pshuto Mikra, and open up a school and teach thousands of people, so maybe no. But there's a lot we can learn from Rav Copperman, and I want to focus on 2 things. The first is what I think is important to mention, Rav Copperman's humility. Anova. Now, as you know, Anova sometimes is misunderstood. So a person who's humble, he doesn't really think he can do much, etc. and so forth, and he ends up kind of doing nothing. And that's not humility. That's just inactivity. Rav Copperman did hundreds of things, but he was always humble. He was not a meek person. He had incredible ambition. And if you look at the picture, and here he was in his 80s, and if this is the only picture you saw of him, you kind of get the impression that he was 80 years old for his whole life. And when you're 80 years old, you can do a lot of things. But when he started Michlalah, he was in his 30s. Most people who are in their 30s have just recently learned how to tie their shoelaces. What have they achieved in life? He's a young guy with a vision. A meek person would not have persevered with everything that he did. The energy and that drive and ambition. So why is he a humble person? Because he always held his goals to be higher than himself. Everything he did in the service that was something greater than himself. Called Torah, called HaKadosh Baruch Hu, called the Jewish people, called girls' education. He always held those goals as being higher than him. That's what sets aside a humble person from someone who's not. Someone who's not humble, they are the goal. Someone who's humble works for the goal. And I think that's an amazing lesson to learn. I don't know if we'll be able to do as much as he did. But whatever we do, whatever our goals are, to learn from him, always to keep our goals higher than ourselves. And then you never know how much energy you'll get from that. You never know how much ambition you'll get from that. And siyata d'shmaya. That's the first one. The second point, which it's a bit of an old school point, in which case it's kind of unfair, but nonetheless, my abiding sense of Rav Copperman, and I was with him many, many times over the years, he never seemed to be in a hurry. He never seemed to be flustered. In fact, he always seemed to kind of have all the time in the world. He was always doing something. And what he was always doing was one thing. Whatever needed to be done at that time. And I think there's an amazing thing there. Because we suffer. Because we live in a time where we consider success to be multitasking. If you do 4 things at once, you'll be 4 times as successful. As opposed to really not doing anything correctly. And it's always funny to look at people like Rav Copperman, who never really seem to be doing more than one thing at once. And then by the time they're finished, they've done so many things, and we're still kind of scrambling. And what was their secret? He didn't really seem to be that busy at all. How did he do so many things? Because everything he did, he put his entire self into that one thing, whatever it was. And that's like an open secret, but it should be shared. Because if we wish to try and emulate him, maybe we could do a bit more, or just doing one thing at a time, but with all of yourself, with all of you, 100%. I think the reason why he gave everything he did 100% is because he believed in everything he did 100%. He didn't just do things that, I should probably do this or that. Everything he did, he saw as so valuable, it deserved 100%. And this brings me really to the final point, even though I only said there would be 2 points, but this is really the second part of the second point. So it's okay. And that is, everything he did with his entire self, and every person that he spoke to with his entire self. And this, again, is the lost art of being there when you're talking to someone. Especially someone who's doing so much. Like when he was, again, in terms of what he was doing, when he was learning something, he had nothing on his mind. It's like he didn't run the Michlalah, and he wasn't printing Sfarm. All he's doing is learning this Ramban. That's all he has in the world. And then he moves on to the next one. And then it's all he has in the world. When you met with him, all he had in the world was you. It was unbelievable. I don't know how many people he knew. He probably could not count. I don't know if he could count how many people he knew. And each of them, when he spoke to them, he was 100% with them. It was amazing. That's why everyone says they had such a special connection with him. And they did. They're all right. It doesn't even mean anything to say, I had a special connection with Harav Copperman, because, join the cast of hundreds and thousands. But they're all correct. You need to, if you want to establish your credentials, you need to then specify what was your special connection with him, because there's not enough to say it was special, and they were all special, and that is a special thing. But how could it be? Because when he was with you, he was completely with you. I met with him once a week, on Thursdays, 6 till 7. Thursday, 6 till 7, nothing else existed in his world except for me and the sefer that we were learning. Some people, especially if they're busy, you kind of get the sense that like 90% of their CPU space is just whirring the whole time anyway. Which means that when they talk to you, they have a maximum of 10% of their RAM space available for you. Maximum. If you're lucky, you'll get like 4 or 5. And that's a good result. With Harav Copperman, you got 100. 100%. He was with you amazing. Sometimes I felt he was with me more than I was with myself. And what was further amazing is, very often, the phone would ring. And when the phone would ring, he would pick up the phone. Tim? Hello? Harav Copperman. And sometimes it would be mamish, excessive. Before the Hagim, for Rosh Hashanah, for Pesach, it was like an epidemic. It would be every Tokadei Dibur, there was the phone ringing. And what was amazing is, when he picked up the phone, because he would answer the phone, he was immediately with that person. He wasn't with me anymore. He was 100% with that person. Instantly, who they were, inquiring after them, their spouse, their children, etc. He was completely with them. They probably thought that he was doing nothing at home. Of course, if they knew him, they knew better. But he was just available for them. And then he put the phone down, and then he's available for me. Until the phone rings again. That type of presence. But why? I think because it's a sign of how important he felt people were. That's the point. Whoever he's talking to deserves 100%. Amazing. And it comes back really to the anava. And I think that's something that we can whatever we do, whoever we talk to, if we take a lesson from Harav Copperman, aside from learning his Pshuta Shemikra and Michlalah and all of that, if you take a behavioral lesson from him, whoever you're talking to, whatever else is going on with you, you're talking to a person, that person deserves 100%. You never know what will happen if you give a person 100%. It'll probably take them a while to recover. So these are just some, again, we could speak and still only really say a little bit, but these are certain points. Pshuta Shemikra, the meaning of Pshuta Shemikra, the role of Pshuta Shemikra together with Drash, and these are things that Mit Hashem I hope will be helpful for you as kalim, as tools, as you go through and continue to learn Chumash, and all of this should be in Nishmas for Harav Copperman.
Okay. Oh, this is hard. Doesn't get easier every year, but I'm going to try. Okay, well, everyone who spoke here before me today called Harav Copperman Harav Saba. One of the greatest manot china that Hashem has blessed me with is that I had this chutz of having Saba Copperman as my Saba. It's an honor and a responsibility to be his granddaughter. It's something that when I was younger I took for granted. But as I matured, I learned to appreciate that it is. It's hard to believe that it's been 2 years since that fateful Monday afternoon when he passed away at Shaarei Tzedek Hospital, surrounded by all of us. He's still so much a part of my life, and I think about him constantly. I find myself asking myself all the time, what would Saba do in this situation? How would he answer this particular student? And when I think about Saba, my mind automatically switches to Savta, because I know that without her, Saba would have never been able to have had. To me, they were and still are a unit. And when I go to the Beis HaChaim about once a week to talk to them, I was just there this morning actually, and to daven to Hashem in their schus, I'm overcome all over again with the responsibility that I have to perpetuate their legacy. What was that legacy? Who was this couple? Since this week it was Saba's Yarzheit, I'll focus on him more and dedicate my words Le'ilui Nishmaso. But as Saba always told his students, Sheli v'shelachem shelahi. Nothing would have happened without Savta. There are scores of people out there who can speak to you about Saba's greatness in Torah and his many accomplishments in the world of Chinuch Habanos and Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. But to me, he was first and foremost Saba. Before teacher, mechanech, menahel. Yes, he was my teacher and mechanech too. But not just in the classrooms here at Michlalah. My education started when I was much younger. One of the earliest childhood memories I have of Saba is of walking around the Michlalah campus holding his hand. I knew very well that Saba was the big boss and that everyone in Michlalah worked for him. And I was very proud to be seen with him. I'll never forget that it took us several minutes to walk to the school building from his apartment, because on the way, he stopped every worker that we saw to say hello and ask him how he was doing, if everything was okay, and if they're drinking enough, and to remind them that if there's anything that they need, they shouldn't hesitate to approach him. I remember talking to the gardener, the maintenance guy, the electrician. Obviously, Saba was on the first name basis with all of them and greeted them with a smile and a friendly pat on the arm. I can see that the workers adored him. As a child, this was fascinating to me. He was a really important man with many workers, and he treats them with such love and respect. He would go to their simchas as well and always inquired about the well-being of their families. Saba did not consider it beneath himself to make a chavrusa with some of the maintenance staff. In one case, he had a chavrusa for over 10 years with one of the workers. This worker would tuck his sefer under his arm and proudly tell everyone he met, Ani holech lilmod im Harav. Saba was a kind, gentle man with a twinkle in his eye and a fantastic, witty, Irish sense of humor. Did she tell you the shaitel story yet? She told it to you? Oh, it's a cute one. Okay. He loved pun words, and he loved throwing like chazals and mixing it with humor. And one time, a married student came, and she was all married and with her new wig, which is slightly too long. So Saba met with her, and she was talking to him, and he said to her, "Elu devarim she'ein lahem shi'ur hape'ah." And and she got it. She got exactly what he was talking about. And he winked at her, and she got the message. He loved spoiling us grandchildren, buying us gifts when he went abroad, and spending as much time as possible with us. But he was also a man that commanded respect in a very quiet way. We all just knew that at Saba and Savta Shabbos table, there is no horsing around. You sit like a mensch. You come to the meal with Dvar Torah prepared, no matter how old you are. Saba always preferred that we prepare Dvar Torah ourselves and not say something that we learned in school. I still remember preparing this really long, complicated Rabbeinu B'chaya in 5th grade to say at the Shabbos Suda. He wanted us to learn how to learn Torah independently, and we did him proud. And many years later, when I was already married with my own family and living in Yerushalayim, Saba and Savta came to us for Shabbos a couple of times. And my kids, who were, Baruch Hashem, young and fun and sometimes a little wild, were angels at Shabbos. They too realized that when Saba and Savta are around, there's a certain appropriate behavior that's expected without even being spoken to about it. I can't say they prepared Divrei Torah, but they behaved. It's pretty good. For my bas mitzvah, Saba and Savta bought me a beautiful set of Mikros Gedolos Chumashim. My friends laughed at me and thought it was really funny, since all the gifts they got were like jewelry and cool electronic gadgets. But I'll tell you one thing. I still have this chumashim today. The pages are worn out, underlined, and used. And I'll bet you that my friends' jewelry and electronics are broken and lost. But I still hold on to my chumashim. Saba and Savta taught us what's important and what's not, what's long-lasting and valuable and what isn't. My mom followed in their footsteps, and last year when my daughter turned bas mitzvah, she bought her a set of Mikros Gedolas Chumashim and a set of Nach. I hope to Mitzvah Hashem follow this meaningful Mizorah. Saba was not just a Talmid Chacham and Baal Eitzah, but he was very down-to-earth and extremely humble. I remember how they always had tons of guests on Shabbos, whether it was family, friends, or Michlalah girls. On Matzi Shabbos, Saba would roll up his sleeves and go help Savta in the kitchen with the piles of dishes waiting in the sink. He would wash and she would dry. And they would sing together as they cleaned up. He was alto, she was soprano, and their harmony was perfect. It was a heartwarming sight, and I loved watching it. But their harmony wasn't just perfect in their song. There was harmony in their home. There was a wholesomeness and peacefulness to their home that you felt when you walked in there. Saba and Savta loved and respected each other, and they each put the other one's needs before their own. They were a living example to me of what Chazal teach us, Ish ve'isha zachu shchina b'neihem. He was ohava kegufo or mechabda yoter migufo. His love and caring for her were reciprocated tenfold. For example, Savta knew that Saba needed to rest every day. But he sometimes got caught up in the day's work and the many responsibilities that came along with being Rosh HaMichlalah, and he didn't allow himself a break. She would then walk to the school building, walk in on the meeting that he was having, and announce in a no-nonsense tone that her husband has to go lie down now and that the meeting will continue later. Saba's health was a priority to her, and she didn't let him neglect it. She also made sure that they went on short mini vacations a couple of times a year so that he can recharge his batteries. She insisted to do whatever she can to lighten his responsibilities at home so he can dedicate himself to his learning and his students. The harmony in their marriage extended even to when Savta was very sick. In the last years of her life, when Savta was already very ill with Alzheimer's, he was there for her, talking to her, holding her hand, taking walks with her, and giving her comfort. During one of her last hospitalizations, I was with her, and Saba came to visit. She was totally out and didn't seem to hear anything around her. But when I told her that Saba was there and he started talking to her, she started to smile. He was the only one she recognized till her very last day. If I had to think of one midah that Saba represented to me more than any others, it's the midah of Akaras HaTov. That was his very essence. Saba's name was Yehuda. Hapa'am Odeh Es Hashem. That's what Saba's life was all about, thanking Hashem and those around him. Whenever I asked Saba, how are you? His answer would always be, Hodu Hashem Ki Tov. When I would ask Savta the same question, her response was, Ma Ashiv Lashem. They never took anything for granted and always relayed everything back to its source. It's no coincidence that the song they walked down to at my wedding was Ma Ashiv Lashem. It was very important to Saba that his family learn the lessons of Akaras HaTov, and the family song that Saba would sing at every family get-together was a 3-word song, Le'olam Hashem Odeka. He would stand up, look around his beautiful family, close his eyes, and start to sing Le'olam Hashem Odeka. He would sing it alone, and then the rest of us would join in. It's a sight I'll never forget. With that simple song, he taught us so much. I remember that several years back, Saba was honored by the mayor of Yerushalayim, and he received an award called Pras Yakir Yerushalayim. This award is given to a few individuals each year who have made a significant impact on the city of Yerushalayim in different areas. I remember the beautiful ceremony that night in the Ir David Arena in the Old City. Saba was the only Frum honoree that year, and he was chosen by the mayor to speak on behalf of the other honorees. What he said that night will remain with me for a long time. He got up and told the audience, that was mostly secular, that when his family and friends heard that he was being honored, they told him, Yehuda, you deserve this. You worked so hard for this award. And Saba said to everyone, in the Lashon HaKodesh dictionary, there's no such concept as I deserve. Magia li. You will look in the whole Tanakh and you won't find it. Saba would know. He was an expert in Lashon HaKodesh. Whatever Hashem has chosen to give me is a gift, and I must look at it as such. Deserving something is not a Jewish concept. Sure, he said, I gave my life to build Michlalah to what it is today, but it's only because of Siyata Dishmaya. Without Hashem, there'd be nothing. I remember my oldest son was turning bar mitzvah. We invited Saba to the Anachas Tefillin at the kotel. Saba was glowing and thanked Hashem profusely for the zchus of attending his great-grandson's Anachas Tefillin. Saba's own father had passed away when he was 11 and wasn't zochet to be at his bar mitzvah. His Hakaras HaTov was not only to Hashem but to everyone around him. Every Sukkot and Pesach we would have him over for Chol Hamoed Suda at our home, which was the highlight of our Yom Tov. My husband would always drive him home afterwards, and a few minutes later I'd get a phone call with Saba on the line. Thank you so much for having me. You gave me such nachas. Your husband and children are beautiful. The food was delicious. I, of course, should have called him to thank him for coming, but he always beat me to it. Saba was never too busy to pick up the phone and call people just to say hi and make someone feel cared for. He would call all his siblings and siblings-in-law every week to make sure they were okay. This is all between writing his Sfarim and running Michlalah. Last year, the Mishpacha magazine ran an article about Saba, and the following week I checked the inbox, and this is what I found. This is the article that I found there. Thank you for Shavi Wallman's timely and moving article on Yehuda Copperman, Zichrono Livracha. He was without a doubt the single most significant influence on the most important decisions I made at the cusp of my adulthood, after my one-year stay in Machal 47 years ago. The kind of person I would marry, the values in the family I hoped to raise, the decision to make my home in Eretz Yisrael. Rav Copperman, besides showing us the depth and complexity of Limudei Tanakh, trusted us, his students, to master the intellectual challenge he set for us. What's more, we felt his expectation that each of us was capable of attaining the highest level of character and nobility of midot. How could we disappoint him? After Michlalah held an alumni reunion attended by thousands of former students, I wrote a letter to Rav Copperman to tell him how deeply the experience of that one year had affected me. I recalled the highlight of that year when 2 busloads of students were stranded in the Sinai desert for 28 hours, decades before cell phones, and the Rav sang for us and gave a shiur as we waited for the army truck to pull us out. Several weeks later, when I was sitting preoccupied in my study, my daughter came in to tell me someone was on the phone for me. I asked her to find out who was calling. She returned to the room and answered, a friend. I was never more flabbergasted than the moment when I discovered that the caller happened to be none other than Rav Copperman himself. I could hardly absorb his own modest and sincere words of thanks for the letter I wrote him. A friend indeed. Miriam Dambi, Yerushalayim. Saba loved and cared for every student, every family member. During the Shiva, I walked into the kitchen to find about 18 of my cousins standing around a circle and having a heated argument. I had actually walked in to shush them. Well, I'm the oldest granddaughter, so I had to do that, okay? And they were getting loud, and people were trying to sit Shiva in the other room. When I asked them what the argument was all about, they said they were trying to decide which grandchild was the closest to Saba. Each one was trying to prove that they were the closest. He learned with me every week, said one. He called me every day, said another. He smiled whenever I walked into the room, said a third, and so it went. I told them they all needed to calm down and that it didn't really matter. And he loved them all, and they were all special to him. Secretly, I smiled to myself. I knew who was really the closest. It was me. Saba loved each and every grandchild for who they were and never once tried to pressure us to become someone we're not. He was the first one we turned to for advice when it came to chinuch issues with our children, and he always had tremendous clarity and vision. He was a real ish chinuch and understood well the challenges that face youth today. I always noticed that great Ahavas Yisrael and respect for every Jew that Saba displayed to all Yidden, no matter what their affiliation. If he had to give tochacha, it was done very carefully and with tremendous love. I heard at the Shiva that one time Saba was walking to shul on Shabbos, and a non-religious driver stopped and asked Saba for directions. Saba looked lovingly at the driver and said, I'm torn. I would love to help you and give you directions to where you need to go. But if I give you directions, it'll cause further Chilul Shabbos. I don't know what to do. The driver was so impressed with Saba's sincerity that he got out of his car and walked to where he needed to go. Saba didn't have to give any musar. He was such a giant of a man, and his love for you changed you. I remember when I was a machal in Saba's Rabbeinu B'chaye class. There was one time that none of us bothered to prepare the material for the upcoming class. It's embarrassing, I know, but it happened. Because we were obviously busy with more important things. Saba asked a few questions at the beginning of class and quickly caught on that none of us knew what he was talking about. He didn't say a word, and he just walked out of the Beit Knesset. All of us were shocked, and none of us dared to move. We all sat there quietly and started to prepare the weekly assignment. He walked in about 20 minutes later and started teaching as if nothing had happened. Not one word of mussar, anger, or rebuke. But you can be sure that such a thing never happened again. Saba had an amazing combination of being so great, yet so humble and approachable that I don't think anyone was even intimidated by him. He would sit in the lunchroom at Michlalah, and students would come sit down, have lunch with him, and schmooze as if they were old friends. People felt so comfortable with him because he was just so not judgmental. One Machal student told me how much it meant to her when at the end of the last Meshech Chachma class of the year, Saba asked each girl for her Hebrew name and gave each girl a bracha as she left the house. This took a long time, but each student mattered to him a great deal. When I would go visit him in Erev Rosh Hashanah, the phone in his house would not stop ringing. Students from all over the world over many decades were calling to wish him a good year. Saba got such nachas from these phone calls that his face would shine blissfully, and he'd say, Hodul Hashem ki tov. In keeping with Saba's legacy, I would like to thank Hashem for giving me the schus of being Saba's eldest granddaughter. Having gotten married first and been blessed with children first, they got to form a real relationship with him too. My husband or I would take our kids every Friday to visit Saba, and that was the highlight of their week. Saba had the latest and greatest Nash cabinet, and each child would get to choose 3 treats for Shabbos. We would then sit in the living room, and Saba would ask all the kids about their week, and some Parsha questions too. Saba would thank us profusely for coming and tell us that we made his week. Of course, the opposite was true. He made ours. One time, my husband had to take care of some errands on Friday, and he had to take the car. I told the kids we wouldn't be able to visit Saba that day because we don't have the car. Boy, did they throw a whole hafgana. They insisted that we go anyway. So we took 2 buses and the light rail, which took about an hour and a half, but they insisted that we still go. So we went. Just to finish with a thought, the Kohen Gadol had a mitzvah to light the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, and the Torah says, V'haloscha es haneros. At shetehea shel hevet olam me'eleha. Rav Hirsch teaches that this is the purpose and goal of every teacher, to ignite the student in a way that he or she rises on their own, that they become an independent flame and their own source of inspiration. This was always the purpose of Saba's chinuch, to ignite a flame that will continue to stay lit, continue to be inspired, and ultimately inspire others. One lesson that I feel we can learn from him is to always thank Hashem for all that he gives us. It's easy to forget that we owe it all to him and to fall into the mindset of Magia li. But Saba's constant message to us was to forever say and sometimes sing, La'olam Hashem Odeka. It's to you, Hashem, that I owe it all. Another lesson which you can learn from him is how he showed us how the telephone can be used. He related to a phone mostly as an instrument through which he gave chizuk to others. Several times a day he would find a way to place a call to someone he knew would be moved by his call. Whether it was a thank you to someone who was just doing their job well, or to a relative who cared that they were thought of, his method of using a phone was a big part of his godless. There is so much that we can learn from him, but this is one simple and relevant lesson. It's not hard to find people to call who would be touched by our call, and our phones are readily available to assist us. I've allowed myself to praise my Saba today, even though he was very humble, because I know that he would have forgiven me if there was a lesson to be learned. Specifically a lesson which would ignite the listener, Achatea shel hevet olam me'eleha. Let us all try to learn the lesson of never feeling that we deserve things, that whatever happens at any given moment, he'll always see things the same way he did. Hodul Hashem ki tov. Thank you.